Welcome back to Chapter 3 of 6 of my free full-stack Spring Security and React Employee Management Service course. If you missed the first two chapters, I would highly recommend viewing the course from the beginning, as you'll be missing important code and context for this chapter and beyond. With that being said, as always, I'm Ethan, or unauthenticated, your favorite underqualified senior software engineer. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to be uploading this course as a short series here on YouTube. Through the free version of the course, anyone can watch the course as each chapter is uploaded to YouTube and follow along line by line. However, if you want full access to the course and the course materials instantly without waiting, I am also going to be providing a couple of paid versions of the course that will grant you that access. The first paid option will grant you immediate access to the entire course, along with the private resources from the course at a fixed price of $15 through the course tier channel membership. This also grants you access to any other courses currently released at the time of you having the active membership. The second option will also grant you immediate access to the entire course and all of its resources at a price provided by Udemy. I'll provide the link to the Udemy course in the description below, and I'll also attempt to run as many promotions as possible on Udemy to help you save as much money as possible on the course. But ultimately, I will be allowing Udemy to price the course at what they believe it is worth. No matter which option you choose to follow along with, I please ask you to leave a like on the course videos that you do watch, as it is a completely free way to support the hard work I put in to put this project together for you for free. And finally, if you want to see upcoming courses and other software projects, I would highly recommend subscribing, because I upload programming videos typically twice a week. With that being said, let's go and hop into our goals for this third chapter of the course. In this chapter, we'll continue to expand the Spring Boot and React applications. Starting out again in the Java code, we'll be adding the dependencies for Spring Data JPA in our H2 database. That way we can go ahead and start authenticating against a real database rather than a map in the employee service. We'll also be expanding the capabilities of our Spring Security to allow our application to authorize API requests based on the employee's role who is making the request. Our primary focus today will be on the admin employee and the requests that they are allowed to make. After we wrap up the work on the Java side, we'll also be expanding the React application to allow the admins to do their job on the front end rather than making API requests through the terminal or using a tool like Postman. With our roadmap for the chapter laid out, let's go ahead and head over to start.spring.io to go ahead and fetch some new dependencies and get to work on our project. Let's start out by getting the new dependencies we need for this chapter by navigating to start.spring.io, and then let's go ahead and come over to our dependency R, and the first dependency that we want is Spring Data JPA. Let's go ahead and add that. This is the Spring Boot starter, which allows us to connect to most standard SQL database dialects. It also gives us the ability to perform our basic CRUD functionality out of the box, as well as custom data queries in our repository interfaces by setting up some methods with specific names. The next dependency that we want to go ahead and add is called H2 database. I'm specifically using H2 because this is a course where I want to keep the database set up as simple as possible. The great thing about Spring Data JPA is that for your project, you can choose any database dialect that is supported and interchange it with H2. So even though I'm using H2, feel free to use whatever database dialect you want and I already have set up. Now that we have our dependency selected, let's go ahead and click on our Explorer. We'll go ahead and grab our dependencies. The first one we'll go ahead and grab is our dependency for Spring Boot Starter JPA. Let's go and hop into IntelliJ. Inside of IntelliJ, let's open up a project. Let's go into our pom.xml. And inside of our pom.xml, let's go ahead and come up here. And below our security, let's go ahead and paste in this dependency. Let's hop back in here and let's also go ahead and grab the dependency for H2. And once again, inside of IntelliJ, let's go ahead and go below our Lombok where we have a runtime, and we'll go ahead and run H2, which is also a runtime dependency. Now that we have both of these pasted in, let's go ahead and rerun or update our application here. And then now that should be good to go. Now all we need to go ahead and do is hop into the application properties and set up our database connection. To be able to go ahead and set up our database connection, we want to go ahead and open up our project, and we want to go to application.properties. And here we want to go and set up a couple things. First thing that we need to go ahead and set up is our Spring data source URL to our H2 database. To do this, we'll go ahead and say spring.datasource.url is equal to jdbc:/h2:mem:employeedb. On top of this, we also want to go ahead and set the mode equal to PostgreSQL, and this is basically just going to go ahead and set up to act like the industry standard PostgreSQL. We also want to go ahead and set database to lower equal to true. This one is just a personal preference, but this is going to go ahead and set all of our tables and columns to lowercase. Now below this, we want to go ahead and set up our data source driver class. To do this, we're going to go ahead and say spring.datasource.driver class name is equal to org.h2.driver. Next, we need to go ahead and set up the user/username for our database. By default, H2 uses the username of SA, so let's go ahead and just set it as that. So let's go ahead and say spring.datasource.username is equal to SA. Next, we need to go ahead and set up the password for our database. Here we go ahead and set it to whatever we like. For me, I'm just going to go ahead and set it to blank since it's an H2. If you guys already have a database set up, whatever, set it up to the password you have set up here. So I'm going to go ahead and say spring.datasource.password is equal to nothing. Next, we're going to go ahead and set up the Spring JPA database platform, which will be our Hibernate dialect for H2 dialect. So to do this, we're going to go ahead and say spring.jpa.database platform is equal to org.hibernate.dialect.h2 dialect. And finally, we want to go ahead and set up or enable the ability for us to connect to the H2 console. So to do this, we're going to go ahead and say spring.h2.console.enabled is equal to true. So that should go ahead and do it for setting up all of our database properties here. So now whenever we go ahead and start setting some models and some entities, it should go ahead and start creating databases for us, storing that data into the databases. So with that being said, let's go ahead and continue and start setting up some of our database entities. Like I mentioned before, now that we have our database connection set up, I would like to set up a simple base entity for all of our other entities to extend, which includes shared properties such as an ID, when a record was created, and the most recent time it was updated. So to do this, let's go and open up our project, and then inside of our entities, let's go and right click, make a new Java class. We're going to go ahead and call this base entity. Let's go and hit enter and hop into here. Let's go and close out of this. Now that we wanted to store entities in a database, we'll need to do some more annotating to tell Spring and Hibernate. However, let's first start with our long block annotations. First off, we want to go ahead and add the getter annotation. Next, we'll go ahead and add the setter annotation. We'll also include the toString annotation. And finally, we want to go ahead and include the Jakarta annotation called map superclass, which will allow us to use this as a superclass for other objects being stored inside the database. Let's go and import that. That looks good. So now let's go ahead and hop into the class itself and start working on different properties that we're going to share across our entities. The first thing I want to go and start with is an ID. So to do this, we're going to go and say private integer ID. And this, of course, will be the unique ID for the record in our table. Above our private integer ID, we want to go ahead and annotate with the ID annotation, which is going to go ahead and tell Spring JPA that this is the unique identifier for our entity. We'll also go ahead and use the @generated_value annotation as well. This is going to go ahead and allow us to generate IDs in a specific way. We specifically want to go ahead and set the strategy equal to generation type identity. This is basically going to go ahead and generate these in a sequence from like 1 to whatever. So let's go ahead and import our generation type really quick. That looks good to go. Optionally, below our generated value, I'm also going to go ahead and add the @column annotation. Again, this one you don't need to be, but I like to use these just to keep things pretty consistent. Inside of our column annotation, we're going to go ahead and set the name equal to ID. Now to go ahead and do it for our ID property. Now let's go ahead and start working on our next property. Along with an ID, we also want to go ahead and keep track of when these created. So let's go ahead and say private instant create timestamp. Let's go ahead and import our instance. And it's going to go ahead and keep track of exactly when this object was created. Conveniently, this is something that a lot of people like to do, so they actually created an annotation for this. So above our create timestamp, we want to go ahead and include the @create timestamp annotation. And this is going to go ahead and tell Hibernate/Jakarta to go ahead and set this instant the exact time this object is created. So let's go and import that. Once again, we'll go ahead and include an @column annotation. Inside the column annotation, we're going to go ahead and set name equal to create_ts. I have to go ahead and create my columns when I can with the snake case. I don't know why, this is the way I've always done it. This is how I've seen it in a lot of different industries. So this is how we're going to go ahead and do it here. Finally, TypeScript and Axios have a very hard time reading these instant objects, and they aren't necessarily needed for our front end to work. So we're also going to go ahead and annotate with @JSONignore. That way we don't have any issues whenever we are trying to parse this. So let's go ahead and import our JSONignore. And our create timestamp is good to go. Finally, I also want to go ahead and keep track of whenever these objects get updated. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and set up a private final instant update timestamp. Similar to our create timestamp, we also have an annotation called update timestamp to go ahead and allow us to keep track of whenever this object was updated. So let's go ahead and annotate with update timestamp. Let's go ahead and import our update timestamp. That looks good. Once again, we'll go ahead and add the column annotation. Inside a column, we'll go ahead and name this update_ts. And similar to our instant above, we want to go ahead and annotate this with @JSONignore. That looks good for our base entity. So basically any entity that we have is going to have an ID, which is the unique identifier. Again, technically for the employee, it's also going to have a unique identifier of email, but it is what it is. It's going to be like the actual one that's indexed in the database. Then we also want to go ahead and have a create timestamp, which is going to keep track of when this object was created. And it's also going to have an update timestamp just in case we make updates to it so we can keep track of when it was updated. So with that being all good to go, we can go ahead and start working on our next set of entities. Before we get started setting up the employee itself, we need to go ahead and move along to setting up some new objects that will go ahead and belong to the employee object itself. First up, we'll need to go ahead and define an enum that will define the different types an employee can have. So let's go ahead and open up our project here. Go into entities, we'll go ahead and create a new Java class. We want this to be an enum. And it's going to go ahead and be called pay type. Let's go and hop into pay type. And pay type is going to be pretty simple. Our employees are going to have just two different ways of being paid. The first one is going to go ahead and be hourly, and the second one will be salary. So those are going to be our pay types. And that's our simple pay type enumeration. Now we need to move on to the pay information object, which will lay out all the details about how much an employee is paid. To do this, let's go ahead and open up our project once again. Let's go ahead and make a new Java class. We're going to go ahead and call this pay information. Let's go ahead and hit enter, and we're going to go ahead and close out of our Explorer here. Since this class is going to be an entity stored in a database, we want to go ahead and first be sure to extend our base entity class that we just created. Then we're going to go ahead and add a few annotations above it. To be able to actually mark this class to be stored in a database, we're going to need to go ahead and mark it with a specific annotation called @entity. So let's go ahead and throw in @entity here. And then what's going to happen is whenever Spring starts up this project, it's going to go ahead and look for any @entity annotation, and then create that into a database using Spring Data JPA and Hibernate. Let's go ahead and import that. Next up, we'll go ahead and annotate with @table. Let's go ahead and import this. This is just going to basically allow us to add in any more information that we want about the table. Now let's just go ahead and set the name of the table equal to pay information. And that looks pretty good. Make sure we actually import this from the correct. We'll go ahead and say Alt Enter and IntelliJ. And it should allow us to choose which one we want to make sure this comes from Jakarta. There we go, looks a lot better. Now that we have our persistence annotation set up, we can go and start setting up some of our long block annotations to make our lives easier. First up, let's go ahead and include the no argument constructor annotation. Let's also go ahead and include the all args constructor annotation. We'll go ahead and include the data annotation, which will go ahead and generate our getters, setters, toString, and the likes. Finally, we'll go ahead and include a build annotation, which is going to go ahead and make it easier on ourselves to construct a pay information object later on down the road. Looks good for our annotations. Go and hop inside of the pay information class and start setting up some properties. This is going to be a pretty simple object with only two fields. We want to go ahead and declare a private type pay type. This will, of course, declare whether the employee is getting paid by the hour or they're getting paid a flat rate salary. Above our pay type, we want to go ahead and include the enumerated annotation. This will go ahead and tell Hibernate how to store the enum in the database. Let's go ahead and import that. Inside of the enumerated annotation, we also want to go ahead and include the enum type string to tell Hibernate to store the pay type as a string in the table. Let's go ahead and import our enum type here. Looks good. Next, we'll also go ahead and include the column annotation above the pay type. Inside the column annotation, we'll go ahead and set the name equal to pay underscore type. And that's just to be consistent with the rest of our tables. Next, we need to know how much to actually pay the employee. So now we're going to go ahead and say private big decimal pay amount. Let's go and import our big decimal here. Above our pay amount, we'll go ahead and annotate with @column again. Inside the column, we'll go and set the name equal to pay underscore amount. That should go ahead and wrap this up. Let's go and continue moving on, creating some more entities here. Next up, we need to go ahead and create a class to store the employee's contact information about where they live for tax purposes. So let's go and open up our project once again. Let's go and make a new Java class. We're going to go name this class contact information. Let's go and open this up. Go and close out of this. Now we need to go ahead and go through all the different things that we went through last time around. The first thing we need to go ahead and do is go ahead and extend the base entity. Then we need to go ahead and set up the annotations above. We're going to go ahead and set up the entity annotation to go ahead and tell Spring Data JPA to store this as a database table. Then we'll also go ahead and annotate with @table, so we can go ahead and name our table whatever we like. Inside the table annotation, we'll go ahead and name this contact underscore information. And now we should be ready to set up our long back annotations to go and make our lives easier. First, we'll go ahead and say no args constructor. We'll say all args constructor. We'll say data. And finally, we'll add the builder annotation to make our lives easier whenever we want to go ahead and build one of these. That looks good for the annotations. Let's go and hop into our contact information entity itself. Now, inside of the class, we'll go ahead and set up all the fields related to contacting the employee. First off, we'll go ahead and say private string phone number. Above our phone number property, we'll have the @column annotation. Inside column, we'll go and set the name of the column to phone_number. I also want to go ahead and set that this column is unique across all entities, because an employee can only have one phone number can only belong to one employee. So obviously that wants to be unique there. And finally, the length of our phone number is going to be equal to 10. That looks good. Let's come down for our next property. So we want to go ahead and declare a private string address line 1. We'll go ahead and annotate with @column. Inside, we'll go ahead and name the column address_line_1. And here, we want to go ahead and set nullable to true. This is because we're only going to go ahead and require the employee's phone number upon the employee creation. Next up, let's go and declare a private string address line 2. Once again, annotate with @column. We'll go ahead and name the column address line 2 with underscores. And once again, nullable will be set to true. Next up, we'll go ahead and set up a private string state. Add the column annotation. We want to set the length equal to 2. And nullable equal to true. Next, we're going to go ahead and set up a private string city with the @column annotation once again. This notice how nullable equal to true inside the column. And finally, we'll go ahead and set up one last column called private string zip code. Above, we'll annotate with @column again. Name will be zip_code. We'll set the length equal to 5. And nullable will be equal to true like the other ones. So that looks pretty good. That should be our entire contact information. Now we should be ready to go ahead and hop back into our employee object and start getting some stuff set up. Before we actually hop into our employee object, we need to go ahead and just set up one more enum before we're fully ready to construct our employee entity class. Let's go ahead and open up our project, go into our entities, right click, new Java, go ahead and set up an enum. We're going to go and call this employee type and go ahead and hop in here and close out of this. There could be a few different employee types, and these are going to go ahead and equate to the different roles that the employee is going to have. Instead of our employee enum, there will be an admin type employee, a manager type employee, and finally there'll be an employee type employee. As we went over in the first chapter of this course, as you go down the list, each one of these is going to have less responsibilities and less access to the backend API. Now that we have all of our enums and objects set up, so with that being said, let's go and hop into employee. The first thing we need to go and do for employees is to go ahead and extend our base entity again. We need to go ahead and start setting up the annotations we had for the previous ones. So above our @data, let's go ahead and add in @entity. Go ahead and import that. Let's also go ahead and annotate with @table. Also import that as well. Inside of our table, we're going to go and set the name equal to employees. So I'm going to hop into the class itself. We're going to be adding a few more properties, as well as just annotating some of the properties that already exist. Let's go ahead and come down here above the first name. First thing we want to go ahead and do is set up a new property. It's going to be a private employee type, and we'll go ahead and call it employee type. Above our employee type, we'll go ahead and annotate with @column. Inside, we'll go and set the name equal to employee_type. We also need to go ahead and annotate with @enumerated since this is an enum. We want to go ahead and set the enum to enumtype.string. Make sure we go ahead and import enum type here so that we can go ahead and save that. That looks good. Next, we want to go ahead and annotate our first name with @column. We'll go ahead and set the name equal to first_name. Also go ahead and annotate the last name property with @column, and name will be equal to last name. Next, below our email, we're going to go ahead and set up a private contact information. Above our contact information, we need to go ahead and include the @one-to-one annotation. And this is because one contact information will only belong to one employee ever. Instead of the one-to-one annotation, we'll go ahead and say cascade is equal to cascade type.all. Let's go ahead and import this if we need to. It looks like it is fine. So what this is going to go ahead and do is it's going to go ahead and remove the contact information record from the contact information table if that associated employee is deleted from the employee table. That way there's no orphaned records. Now we want to go ahead and come below this one-to-one. We want to go ahead and add the @join column annotation. Inside of join column, we'll go ahead and set name equal to employee_contact. We're going to go ahead and set the reference column name equal to ID. And this is because this is the primary key of our contact information table. And finally, if we want to go ahead and remove this, we can go ahead and set it to null, for example. So we're going to go ahead and say nullable equal to true. So let's go ahead and do it for our employee contact information. Above our email, we want to go ahead and annotate with @column again. Here we'll set name equal to email. And we'll go ahead and set unique equal to true because the employers will be using their emails as their login username. So that looks good to go. Let's go ahead and come below our password. Below our password, let's go ahead and set up a private Boolean first-time login. Above first-time login, we'll have the @column annotation again. We'll set the name equal to first_login. Then we'll come below our first-time login. And now we'll go ahead and set up their pay information. So let's say private pay information. Above our pay information, we'll once again have an @one-to-one because only one employee will have one pay information object. And we'll go ahead and set cascade equal to cascade type all once again. Below one-to-one, we'll once again have an @join column annotation. We'll set the name equal to pay_information. And we'll set the reference column name equal to ID. Once again, because we're going to be referencing the primary key of our ping information object here. Next up, we need to go ahead and set up a list of different employees that is reporting to the specific employee. Now, if this is some sort of employee that doesn't have any reports, this will just be an empty list or a null. But if it's like a manager or an admin, this will be set up. So let's go ahead and say private list employee reports. Let's go ahead and import our list object here. And let's go and go above it. Above, we want the one-to-many annotation. Go and import that. And that's because one employee could have many reports. Inside, we're going to set map2 equal to reports2. And we'll go ahead and set that up next. Next, we'll go ahead and say private employee reports2. So this is more or less going to be this employee's manager. Above, we'll go ahead and say many to one. And again, this is going to be many to one because it's the opposite here. So many employees can report to one single manager. Then inside of our many to one, we're going to go ahead and set up a fetch as fetch type.eager. This should go ahead and fetch the employee's manager object as soon as we get the object itself rather than lazily. We could also get into some situations where the employee in the reports cause a circular dependency. So we need to go ahead and include the JSON ignore properties annotation. We want to go ahead and ignore the property called reports. And finally, we'll go ahead and have a join column annotation. And we'll go ahead and name our join column reports_2. Let's go ahead and save this up. This should be our entire employee and all of our entities that we need for now. For now, we won't actually be able to see these because we still need to set up repositories, and we still also need to be able to set up the configuration for Spring Security to actually allow us to see the H2 database. So let's go ahead and start working on those things. And then once we have everything set up, we'll go ahead and check out the H2 console to make sure we can see all of our database tables. The first thing we want to go ahead and do to start being able to see the different database tables and information inside the database tables is to start setting up our data repositories, which will allow us to fetch and save data to our database. So we're just going to go down our list basically of all the different entities that we just created in this chapter and create different repositories for them. Most of these repositories aren't going to have anything in them because we just need the basic CRUD functionality, and then one or two might actually have some extra functionality to fetch some information that we actually need to update or read for whatever reason. So let's go ahead and hop into our project here, and the first thing we need to do is go ahead and make a new package, and this is going to go ahead and be called repositories. Then inside repositories, let's go ahead and start making some classes, which should be interfaces. Let's go ahead and start out with a contact information repository. Let's go and open this up, and then all of our repositories are going to be primarily the same setup. The first thing I want to go ahead and do inside of this is extend the JPA repository. Let's go and import that JPA repository. Then we need to go ahead and set up the type that we're going to be searching for, as well as the type of our ID. So to do this, we're going to go ahead and have our angle brackets, and inside of them, we're going to have contact information, comma integer. Let's go and import our contact information. So what this is basically saying is we're going to have a JPA repository that reads, writes, does whatever with contact information, and then we expect the ID to be integer. Now, finally, the last thing that we want to go ahead and do to wrap up this repository is go ahead and annotate with @repository above. This is not necessary because technically whenever it's on an interface, it doesn't really work, but it kind of works. This is just kind of something that I do for good measures, and that's just keep it at that. But let's go ahead and save that, and that is our contact information repository. Now let's go ahead and open up our project once again. Let's go ahead and right click new Java class, make a new interface. Let's go and make the employee repository. Let's go ahead and close out of the sidebar again. Once again, we'll go ahead and say extends JPA repository. Let's go and import the JPA repository, and then we need to go ahead and do the same thing again. We need to tell it that we want to read employee objects, and we want to tell it that the ID is of type integer. So let's go ahead and have our angle brackets once again and have employee and integer. Let's go and import our employee object here. So it looks good. And then above, once again, we're going to go ahead and add the @repository annotation for good measure. Once again, import that. Now inside, we are going to have a couple or at least one repository method here that'll go ahead and fetch employees by a specific way. So what we're going to go ahead and do is inside of our repository interface, we want to go ahead and first say optional employee. Let's go ahead and make sure we import our optional. And we're going to go ahead and say find by email. And inside, we'll go ahead and pass it in a string email to find by. Now, what this is going to go ahead and do is it's going to go ahead and do a select star from our database where our email is equal to the email that we pass in here. And then Spring Data JPA will go ahead and do the rest of the logic for us there. So that's going to go ahead and do it for our employee repository for now. So let's go and open up our project once again. Go ahead and right click on our repositories, make a new interface. And here we're going to have a pay information repository. Go ahead and open this up and close out this. Once again, we need to go ahead and extend JPA repository. let's go and bring in the JPA repository. Once again, we need to go ahead and tell it what type we're reading and the type of the ID. So let's go and say pay information and insert inside of our angle brackets. Let's go and import our pay information and then come up here. For the heck of it, let's go and add in the repository annotation. Let's go and import that, and that is looking good to go. And that's going to be everything we need. We don't need any custom logic for our pay information either. So it's going to go ahead and conclude setting up our repositories. Now we can go ahead and move forward with updating our Spring security configuration to allow us to access our H2 database. So to allow ourselves to access our H2 database console, we need to actually go ahead and tell our Spring security configuration to allow us to connect to that page and view that information. So what we need to go ahead and do is we need to open up our project here, and let's hop into our security configuration just like that. And we need to go ahead and scroll down to where our security filter chain is here. And we need to set up some new information. So the first thing we need to go ahead and do is we need to go ahead and allow frame headers. Otherwise the H2 console is not going to properly render. So to do this, let's go ahead and come below our cores here. We're going to go ahead and add in dot headers. Inside the dot headers, let's go ahead and set up a lambda with headers. Then we're going to go ahead and call headers.frameOptions. And inside of the headers.frameOptions, we'll go ahead and call headers configurer.frameOptions config : same origin. Now we need to go ahead and import the headers configurer like so, and then now that should be fine and dandy. Now we also need to go ahead and tell our unprotected routes that we are allowed to hit this being unauthenticated. So what we want to go ahead and do is come in here. Let's go ahead and add a comma and come in below the /auth/**. We want to go ahead and add in a new ant path request matcher. Inside, we want to go ahead and include the URL of h2 console /*. Let's go ahead and save that, and that should be good to go. Now we should, in theory, be able to actually connect to the H2 database. So let's go ahead and open up a web browser here and just make sure all of our data is there. Before we do that, let's go ahead and restart our application just to make sure everything gets reprocessed, all of our entities get processed and all of that good stuff. There we go. As you can see, we don't have any issues, and it also says H2 console is available at /H2 console at this JDBC. So I'm actually going to go ahead and copy this JDBC H2 mem employee DB. It's going to be important whenever we get there. So let's open up the browser like I mentioned. And in here, let's go ahead and hop in here. What we want to go ahead and do is go http:// and then localhost 8000 /H2 -console. Hit enter, and now you can see it lets us in. It already has this. Sometimes this will go ahead and be pre-populated. Sometimes it won't for the first time you load this up. So just be aware of that. That's why I went ahead and copied it. And I know it's a little bit small, so not much we can do here. But let's go ahead and click connect. And now you can see we have our contact information. If we click run, we have our ID, our state, our zip code, create TS, update TS, phone number, address line 1, address line 2, and city. Now why address line 1 and address line 2 are after the ones and it's not in any specific order, I don't know. But if we go ahead and take a look at employees, we have employee contact. We have our first name or our first login, our ID, our pay information reports to, our create TS, our update TS email, first name, last name, password, and our type. So that looks good. And finally, we have our pay information. Should be pretty simple. Our ID, pay amount, create timestamp, update timestamp, and pay type. So as we get add stuff in here, we can come in here, take a look, make sure it's all getting added properly. But that should be all good to go. So now we can go ahead and start setting up a couple other services to go ahead and generate some of our contact information, pay information, stuff like that. Then we can go ahead and start registering employees, getting the roles all working, all of that good stuff. So let's hop back into our IntelliJ and get to work here. As I mentioned at the end of the last section, now that we have our database configuration all done and all the entities we need set up, we need to set up some new service layer classes to generate records that are stored in our employee object. Let's start by setting up the contact information service. So let's go ahead and open up our project. We'll come into our service and go ahead and make a new class. This is going to go ahead and be contact information service. Let's go ahead and hit enter to create that class, and let's go ahead and close out our project explorer. Above our contact information service, we want to start out by going ahead and adding the @service annotation. That way Spring knows this should be a service bean. We also want to ensure that each one of these methods runs as a transaction on the database. So let's go ahead and add the @transactional annotation as well. Make sure this is going to come from org.springframework.transactional.annotation. And finally, we're going to be passing in some dependencies. So we want to go ahead and also include the required args constructor. That way we can automatically wire these dependencies for ourselves. Let's go ahead and make sure we import that as well, and that is looking good. Now let's go ahead and hop into the class itself. Inside of the contact information service class, we're just going to need one dependency to be brought in. So let's go ahead and say private final contact information repository, contact information repository. Let's go ahead and ensure that we import our contact information repository, and that's all we're going to need because this service is just going to deal with creating and fetching our contact information service objects for our employee here. Now that we have our way of creating and fetching different contact informations from our database, let's go and start up the single method that we want inside of this service to create our contact information. Let's go ahead and say public contact information, create contact information. Now we're going to need to go ahead and import our contact information. Let's also open up this class here. And then inside of our create contact information method parameters, we want to go ahead and pass in the contact information that we are going to store in the database. So let's go ahead and say contact information, contact information. Now that looks good. Let's go and hop into the method itself. This is going to be a very, very basic method where all we're going to go ahead and do is save this contact information into the repository. That way we can go ahead and link it to our employee object. To do this, all we're going to go ahead and do is say return contact information repository.save. And inside of the save method call, we're going to go and pass in that contact repository that we passed in inside of the method parameters. That looks good. That's all we need to do inside of this class, because all we're going to go ahead and be doing here is just saving this. That way we can go ahead and put it inside of our employee object and then save our employee object. So now that that's done, let's go and open up our project again. Let's go ahead and right click on our services package, go ahead and make a new Java class, and then we're going to go ahead and make the pay information service. Go and open this up and close our project explorer. And I'm going to kind of go through the same exact steps we just went through in the last one. Let's go and annotate this with @service so Spring knows that this is a service. Let's also go and annotate with @transactional so that Spring treats every method like a transaction on the database. Make sure this comes from Spring. And we'll once again be using the repository for the pay information. So let's go ahead and add the required Args constructor to be able to auto wire this automatically for us. Looks good. Let's go ahead and hop into the class itself. Once again, we need access to the database so we can store some pay information records. That way we can put them on our employee objects. So let's go ahead and say private final pay information repository, pay information repository. Let's ensure that we go ahead and import our pay information repository. That way we can actually save these records. Let's come below our pay information repository because that's all we're going to go ahead and need. Once again, since all we're going to be doing is storing these pay information records on the employee object and we'll be able to see them on the employee object, we only need one method, and that's to go ahead and create these records. Let's go ahead and say public pay information, create pay information. Once again, we're going to need to go ahead and import our pay information. So that is fine. Inside of our method parameters for our create pay information method, we need to go ahead and pass in the pay information object that we want to persist on our database. So let's go and say pay information, pay information. Let's go and open up this method, and this one's going to be very simple, just like whenever we went to save our contact information. Let's simply return a call to the pay information repository.save, and inside the save method call, we're going to go ahead and pass in that pay information that we passed inside the create pay information method parameters. So now that should go ahead and wrap up our pay information service, and that should also enable us to finally be able to set up our employee service to save an employee to our database. Let's go and hop over to that employee service file and update to use the new repository. Inside of our employee service class, we're going to have a few things we need to go and update here. First thing we want to go and do is I'm going to come below our service annotation, and I'm going to go ahead and add in the @transactional annotation. Since we're now going to be using a database, let's go and import that from Spring. The rest of these are looking good. Then we need to go ahead and come down inside the class. I'm going to go ahead and come above our private employees map. And we're going to go ahead and say private final employee repository, employee repository. And let's go ahead and make sure that we import our employee repository here. We're going to be getting rid of this map. But for the time being, I'm not going to delete it yet because it's going to break a whole bunch of things. So we'll wait until we're completely done updating all of this before we go ahead and delete that. So now the first thing that we want to go and do is we want to get rid of this create employee method, because we're going to go ahead and create a new one in its place that goes ahead and creates and updates an employee based on some information that we pass in, basically based on an employee that we pass in. And this is because we're going to go ahead and put our creation of employees under a register method inside of our authentication service. So let's go ahead and delete this, and we're going to go ahead and replace it with a public employee create or update employee method. And inside of our create employee method parameters, we're going to go ahead and pass in employee. And this is going to be the employee that we want to go ahead and save or update on our database. Inside our create or update employee, let's go and set up a try catch. Let's go ahead and set up our catch here really quick. Let's go ahead and just catch an exception E. And if we do catch an exception, we're simply just going to go ahead and throw a new runtime exception for the time being. Here in a little bit, we're going to go ahead and actually create a custom exception to throw here that we couldn't create the employee, but for the time being, to make the compiler happy, we're going to go ahead and just keep it as that. Next, inside of our try statement, we want to go ahead and return employee repository.save. We want to go ahead and pass the employee object from our create or update method parameters here. So now we're going to go ahead and attempt to save the employee record or update it, because whenever you call save, it'll save it, or if the record already exists, it'll update it. So go ahead and try to do that on our database. And then if something goes wrong, we'll go ahead and just throw a new runtime exception, which is eventually going to go ahead and be that unable to register employee exception. And speaking of the unable to register employee exception, let's go ahead and set that up. That way we can completely finish up this method. Let's go ahead and open up our project. And inside of our exceptions, let's go ahead and create a new Java class. Create an exception, and we're going to go ahead and call this unable to register employee exception. Go and open this up and close out of here. Again, it created one of the constructors for us, which is kind of nice. So up here, we're going to go ahead and just create a new public unable to register employee exception constructor. This one's going to be a no args constructor. So we're just going to go ahead and call super with a message of unable to register employee. Let's go and save this up. And then below this one, let's also go ahead and create one more public unable to register employee exception constructor here. Inside the constructor parameters, let's go ahead and pass in a string message and throwable cause. Let's hop into the constructor itself. We want to go ahead and call super message and cause. This is going to help us out to know like what SQL error actually occurred whenever we went through and couldn't create the employee, because sometimes it's a little bit cryptic, especially if you're not going ahead and throwing in that cause. So it's going to go ahead and help us out in that aspect. Now that we have created our custom exception, let's go ahead and head back into our employee service. And instead of throwing a new runtime exception when the error for creating the employee occurs, let's go ahead and throw that new unable to register employee exception. So let's go ahead and hop into the employee service. And then let's go ahead and get rid of this throw new runtime exception. And instead, let's go ahead and throw a new unable to register employee exception. Let's go ahead and import this. And inside of the constructor, let's go ahead and pass in a message that says unable to create or update employee at this time, and also pass in E as the cause. That looks good. So that's going to go ahead and complete our create or update employee. Next, we want to go ahead and update our read all employees. So now we can go ahead and delete this return statement here. We're going to simplify this tremendously. Instead of reading through that map of employees, we're simply going to go ahead and return employee repository.findAll. And that's all we need to do there. So next up, we need to go ahead and set up a private utility method for finding an employee by the email. So let's go ahead and scroll down here to below our user details method. And let's go ahead and declare a new private method that returns an employee called getEmployee by email or throw exception. Inside the method parameter, we'll go ahead and pass in a string email. And inside the method itself, we're going to go ahead and return employee repository.find by email. Here we want to go ahead and pass that email. Now, if you guys remember, this is actually an optional, not an employee that gets returned here. So if the employee doesn't exist, we also want to go ahead and say or else throw. And what we want to go ahead and throw if the employee doesn't exist is an employee does not exist exception, : new. So now we'll go ahead and try to fetch the employee by the email. And then if they don't exist, we'll go ahead and throw that exception. If they do exist, we'll go ahead and just return the employee. So now let's go ahead and scroll back up to the getEmployee by email method. And now we can go ahead and just kind of clean this method up like so. Now what we're going to do is return a call to getEmployee by email or throw exception. And once again, inside of the method call, we'll go ahead and pass in that email. So that goes ahead and updates our read employee by email. Now what we need to go ahead and do is we need to go ahead and set up another utility function to update the employee's reports. To do this, let's go ahead and say protected void update employee reports. Inside the method parameters, we're going to go ahead and pass in an employee manager, an employee report, and a string operation. Let's go and open up the method here. First thing that we want to go ahead and do is get the manager's report. So we're going to go ahead and say list employee reports is equal to manager.getReports. Then we want to go ahead and add a check to see if the operation is equal to add. If this is the case, we just want to go ahead and add the employee to the manager's reports list. Let's go ahead and say reports.add report. Otherwise, if we're not adding, that means we're taking it away. So we need to go ahead and do some filtering to get rid of the employee that's being updated here inside of the manager's reports. So to do this, let's go ahead and say reports is equal to reports.stream. Then we'll say .filter employee. We're going to filter by employee.getID is not equal to report.getID. Finally, we want to go ahead and terminate this to a list using .toList. Now let's come out of the else if, and we're going to go ahead and call manager.setReports to that new reports list. Then we want to go ahead and update this manager on our database side. So let's go ahead and say employee repository.save manager. There we go. That should go and update the employees' reports. So basically all we want to do here is make sure that the manager was getting their reports list updated properly with whether we're adding or removing an employee from that report. And we want to go ahead and do this because it's going to be used in a couple places. So I want to not have to completely redo that all the time. Let's go ahead and come up here to modify our update employee method. And before we start updating our update employee method here, we need to hop into our update employee request. We need to update the properties that are inside this record to be able to update the employee with our new method. And we need to go ahead and add in those same exact properties. Let's go and get rid of employee. And then let's start out by adding the employee type. Let's go and import the employee type here. That way it's not mad at us. We'll have the string first name. We'll have the string last name and the string reports to. And that looks good. So now we can go and close out of this update employee request and go ahead and come back into our employee service. Now that we have everything set up to actually update our update employee, let's go ahead and remove the old parameters from here. Then let's go ahead and pass in just an update employee request called request. Let's ensure that our update employee request is imported. And then unfortunately, we're going to go ahead and remove all the logic from here and completely rewrite this. The first thing that we want to go ahead and do inside of our update employee method is actually fetch the employee by their email. So let's go and say employee is equal to get employee by email or throw exception. Inside of the get employee by email or throw exception method, we want to go ahead and pass in request.email. And then now if we have the employee, we're going to go ahead and start working on them. So what we basically need to go through is we need to go through this request object and check to see if we've actually set different properties. Then if we have set different properties, we'll go ahead and update the employee object. The first property I want to go and check to see if we set is request.firstname. So let's go ahead and say if our request.firstname is not equal to null. If this is the case, when we pass in an updated first name, so then we want to go and update our employee object. To do this, let's go ahead and say employee.setFirstName to our request.firstName. Next, let's go ahead and set up another if statement to check to see if request.lastName is not equal to null. Once again, if this is the case, that means that we want to go ahead and update our last name property. So let's go ahead and call employee.setLastName to request.lastName. Next, we want to go ahead and do a check to see if we are changing our request type. So we're going to go ahead and this one's going to be a little bit ugly and long, but we're going to go ahead and say if not request.type.equals employee.getEmployeeType. So if our employee types do not match, that means we've updated them. So let's go ahead and say employee.setEmployeeType request.type. Next, we want to go ahead and check to see if reports to is not equal to null. This means that we're changing the employee's manager. So let's go ahead and get the old manager by saying employee manager old is equal to employee.getReports2. We'll also go ahead and say employee manager is equal to get employee by email or throw exception because we want to go ahead and fetch the actual employee object that is the manager because all we're going to be doing here is passing in the string for their email. So like I said, it's going to say employee manager is equal to get employee by email or throw exception. To the method, we'll go ahead and pass request.reports2. We'll go ahead and update the employee object by saying employee.setsReport to manager. Then we need to go ahead and update the old manager and the new manager's reports list. So first we'll go ahead and say update employees reports, manager old, employee, and remove. So go ahead and remove the employee from the old manager's reports list. Then let's also go ahead and say update employees reports with manager, employee, and add. We'll also go ahead and add that employee to the new manager's reports list as well. Finally, we want to go ahead and check to see if the employee.getEmployeeType is equal to employeeType.admin. We also want to go ahead and check to see if the employee.getEmployeeType is equal to manager. Let's go and hop inside this if statement. And then we also want to see if this person was not a manager or admin at the time. So we're going to go ahead and check to see if the reports to is not equal to null. If this is the case, that at one point they were a regular employee and then got promoted to a manager and admin. So now they no longer need to report to a manager. So here we're going to go and say update employee reports with the employee.getReports to employee and remove. And we'll also go ahead and say employee.setReports to null because they're not reporting to anyone. Finally, let's come out of this if statement and we want to go ahead and call employee.setEmail because if their first and last name changed, then their email also needs to change to reflect that as well. Inside the employee.setEmail, let's first go ahead and say employee.getFirstName.to lowercase. We want to say plus employee.getLastName.to lowercase. And finally say plus at company.com. Again, there's better ways to configure the email and set up the email, but this is going to be quick and dirty because I want to focus on the Spring security related stuff, not necessarily creating a perfect system for creating employees and whatnot. The final thing that we need to go ahead and do is return that saved employee object. So let's go ahead and say employee repository that save employee. And that should go ahead and do it. So basically, we're just going to go through, check to see if any of our properties got actually sent by. So because we want to update that specific property. If we don't want to update a specific property, then we're just going to basically ignore it. That's why we're setting it to null. And then also the more kind of complicated stuff is just updating the manager's reports to and all that stuff. But I think that is looking pretty good to go. The final thing that we want to go ahead and do is update our delete employee method here. So what we're going to go and do is clear out the information inside here. And what we want to go ahead and do is say employee is equal to get employee by email or throw exception. Inside the method, we'll go ahead and pass in the email to get the actual employee. So now if the employee doesn't exist, we'll just automatically throw that exception instead of having to check for it. And then we can go ahead and just call employee repository.delete employee. So that's looking good. Finally, we want to go ahead and update our load user by username method. That way we can actually go ahead and check what their role is. We also need to go ahead and update the password encoder part because now whenever we create the employee, it's going to automatically be encoding it for us. So we don't need to deal with this part. So the first thing let's do, let's go ahead and say the password is going to be employee.getPassword. It's already going to be encoded. Then let's come up below our employee.getPassword and we're going to go ahead and add .roles. And inside of .roles, we're going to go ahead and say employee.getEmployeeType.toString. So now this is going to go ahead and allow us to check the employee that we get back when our user details and also take a look at what role they are to determine whether or not they can hit certain API endpoints. Now, the final thing that we want to go ahead and do is we want to go ahead and remove this public load employee data method. Of course, this is going to break some things. That's completely fine. We're going to go ahead and throw this into the authentication service in a little bit. And now we don't actually need our employees anymore. We don't technically need our password encoder anymore. So it's going to clean this up a little bit as well. We can go ahead and clean up some of the imports in here as well, just to kind of keep things as clean as possible. Now it is going to be mad at us inside the controller and a couple other places because we deleted some stuff that we need access to. So to go ahead and at least fix up one of the issues, let's go and open up our project here and go into employee management service application. And we're going to go ahead and delete this employee service load here. We do not need the employee service in here anymore. And we can also go ahead and delete the employee service. We're going to come back through after we get done with our authentication service changes and actually make it so that whenever we load in the data, we're going to do it inside of the authentication service instead. But that's going to go ahead and wrap up the code for this section. Go ahead and join me in the next section where we're going to go and start updating the authentication service. Next up, let's work on updating the authentication service. But before we do that, let's go and just close out of some of these tabs that we got here. We don't need all of these. So I'm just going to start closing these. So let's get rid of all of this that we don't need for the time being. And then once I get all of these closed, let's go and hop into the authentication service. Now inside the authentication service, the first thing we need to go and do is come here below our service. And now since we're using databases and Spring Data JPA, it's very important that we go ahead and use the @transactional here. So let's go and bring in the @transactional annotation. Let's go ahead and make sure we import this from the Spring framework. Now it's important because we're going to be doing some data setup, like I said before, for all of our employees at the bottom of this page or at the bottom of this class. And if we don't have this @transactional, it's going to actually break and not run. So it's important that we go ahead and bring that in. Next, let's go ahead and start bringing in some of the new dependencies that we need. So let's go ahead and come in below our employee service. And the first thing I want to go ahead and do is bring in the contact information service. So let's go ahead and say private final contact information service. Okay, and then next we want to also go ahead and bring in the pay information service. So once again, let's go ahead and say private final pay information service. That looks good for our new properties that we need in here or our new dependencies that we need in here. Next up, to be able to actually register a user or an employee, we need to actually go ahead and create a new record to send a response as well as bring in a request. So let's go and open up our project here. Let's go into our DTO, make a new class. This is going to go ahead and be a record, and we're going to go and call this register response first. Let's go and open up our register response, close out our project here. Our register response is going to be very simple. Whenever we register an employee, we're going to go ahead and create an employee object, and then we're also going to go ahead and send their temporary password. That way the admin can go ahead and pass along that temporary password to the employees so they can log in for the first time. Once I have a record, let's go ahead and add an employee and string temporary password. Looks good. And then let's go ahead and bring in an employee object. And then let's come above and let's go ahead and add a builder just in case we ever want to build this object. Let's go ahead and bring in our builder annotation, and that looks good. Now we need to go ahead and create another record for our request body. So let's go ahead and open this up into our DTO, make a new Java class, make it a record. And this is going to be register request. And let's go ahead and hop into register request. Let's close out our project here so it's a little bit cleaner. Now our register request record is going to go ahead and include every property needed to register an employee. So this is going to go ahead and include the employee's type. Let's go ahead and bring in employee type here. It'll include a string first name, a string last name, a string phone number. We need the new employee's pay type. Let's go and bring in the pay type enum here. We need to know how much we're going to pay the employees. So let's say big decimal pay amount. Let's go and bring in our big decimal here. And finally, we need who they're going to report to. That looks good for the properties. Finally, let's go ahead and add the builder annotation on top just in case we ever want to build this object. Let's go ahead and bring that in, and that looks good. So now that we have all of our different request and response objects, we can go ahead and hop back into our authentication service and get to work on actually registering an employee. Before we register an employee, let's come down below our login employee. We need to go ahead and figure out a way to actually generate a temporary password to send to the employee. To do this, let's go ahead and declare a new private method called private string generate temporary password. Now we can go inside, and inside we want to go ahead and return uuid.randomuuid. Let's go ahead and bring in our UUID here. Okay, I guess it's not going to let us import it. There we go. Then we want to go ahead and convert this UUID to a string and grab the substring 08. So we're going to go ahead and generate a random UUID and then go ahead and turn it into a string and then grab the first 8 characters of that string to return as a temporary password. That looks good. So now let's go ahead and actually create the method to register the employee. To do this, let's go ahead and declare a new public register response register employee method. Let's go ahead and import a register response DTO here. And inside the method, let's go ahead and pass in a register request. Once again, we need to go ahead and bring in our register request. Let's go ahead and open up our method body here and get to work. So the first thing we need to go ahead and do is declare a new contact information called employee contact information. We need to go ahead and bring in our employee contact information here like so. And this will be equal to contact information service.create contact information. Let's go ahead and open this up because we're going to go ahead and say contact information.builder. And below the builder, we're going to go ahead and say phone number is equal to register request.phone number. And then we're going to go ahead and say .build. Looks good. So whenever we register an employee for the first time, all we need is their phone number to contact them. Then they'll come back through and actually update their information whenever they like. Next, we need to go ahead and declare a pay information, employee pay information. Once again, let's go and import our pay information here. This is going to be equal to pay information service, create pay information. Once again, let's open this up because we're going to go ahead and say pay information.builder. We're going to set the pay amount to register request.pay amount. We're going to set the pay type to register request.pay type. Then we're going to go ahead and build this pay information object. So now we have our pay information for our employee. Next up, let's go ahead and generate their email. So let's go ahead and say string email. This will be equal to register request.firstname.2 lowercase plus register request.lastname.2 lowercase and then plus company.com. Now we need our temporary password. So let's go ahead and say string temporary password is equal to generate temporary password. Next, we need to go ahead and determine whether or not we need a manager object. So let's go ahead and say employee manager will be equal to register request.reports to not equal to null. Then we're going to go ahead and set up a ternary here. So we're going to say question mark employee service.read employee by email. And we're going to pass that method register request.reports to. Otherwise, we're going to return null. Now we have the employee's manager. Now we can finally go ahead and create and store the employee object in the database. To do this, let's go ahead and declare employee is equal to employee service.create or update employee. Let's go and open this up because we're going to go ahead and say employee.builder. On our builder object, we're going to set the employee type to register request.type. We'll go ahead and set the first name to register request.firstname. We'll set the last name to register request.lastname. Email will be the email that we generated above. Let's set password to password encoder.encode the temporary password. We will set first time login to true. We will set the pay information to the pay information that we created above. We'll set the contact information to the employee contact information we created above. We'll set reports to that manager object we generated above. Reports will be set to a new array list so we don't get any null pointer exceptions. Let's go ahead and import our array list here. And then finally, we can go ahead and .build. So that is our employee object. Now, obviously it's mad because we're not actually returning anything out of the method. We want a register response. Let's go ahead and return register response.builder. Here we want to go ahead and say employee is equal to employee. We want to say that the temporary password is the temporary password that we generated. And finally, we will build our response object. So that should set up the ability for us to actually register an employee if we are an admin. But before we go ahead and finish that up and clean up some more stuff that we need to clean up because we made changes inside the employee service, let's go ahead and generate that utility function or utility method that I was talking about earlier. That's going to go ahead and load in the user information. So let's go ahead and declare a new public void method called load user information. This isn't going to take in any parameters. Let's just go ahead and open this up. And we're going to start out by creating 3 different contact informations and then 3 different pay informations. Then finally, we'll go ahead and create 3 different employees, saving all of the objects to the database as we go. Let's go ahead and start out by declaring a contact information that we'll go ahead and call contact info1 and set that equal to contact information service.create contact information. Let's go ahead and open up this method call. So we can go ahead and say contact information.builder. And then on the builder, let's go and say phone number is 11111. We want to make sure that there's 10 ones here because that's how long a phone number is. Next, we'll go ahead and set the address line 1 to 123 Admin Road. We'll set the city to Worktown. We'll set the state to Texas. Let's set the zip code to 12345. And finally, let's go ahead and build the object to save to the database. So there's our first contact information. Let's go ahead and add some space here so we can see what's going on. And let's go ahead and just copy and paste our contact information here. And then go ahead and paste it in. Let's go ahead and change the name to contact information 2. And then inside of phone number, let's actually go ahead and say 10-2s. And then for address line 1, let's go ahead and say 345 Middle Manager Avenue. For city, let's go ahead and set this to Meeting Central. We'll keep the state the same. We'll update the zip code to 23456. And then that looks good. Let's go ahead and copy and paste our contact information one more time here. Then we'll have contact info 3. And we'll go ahead and start updating the contact information for our regular employee. So here, let's go ahead and update the phone number to 33333 until there's 10 3s. Address line 1 will be 678 Hourly Street. We'll go ahead and add an address line 2, which would be apartment 101. Then our city will be Grindtown. We'll go ahead and keep state the same as Texas. We'll go ahead and update the zip code to 34567. And that should go ahead and do it for our different contact informations. Now we need to go ahead and start setting up the 3 different pay informations for our new employees. Let's go ahead and come down below our contact info 3. And we'll go ahead and say pay information, pay info 1 is equal to pay information service.create pay information. Let's go ahead and open this up and we'll go ahead and say pay information.builder. On the pay information builder, let's go ahead and say pay type is equal to pay type.salary. Let's go ahead and bring in our pay type here. And we'll set our pay amount to a new big decimal of 80,000. Let's go and bring in our big decimal here. There we go. And then finally, let's go ahead and build this object. Looks good. Let's go and copy paste our pay info 1 again. And then let's go ahead and call this pay info 2. The only thing that we want to go ahead and change here is instead of a big decimal of 80,000, we'll go ahead and say a big decimal of 100,000. Looks good. Let's go ahead and copy paste our pay info 2. Let's go and rename this pay info 3. Here, let's go ahead and change the pay type to pay type.hourly. And then for our pay amount, we're going to go and set this to $25 an hour. So that should be all of our pay infos. Now we need to go through and just start creating all of the different employees. So let's go ahead and start out by saying employee admin is equal to employee service.create or update employee. Here it's not 100% necessary to actually declare an admin here. We could have just called employee service.create or update employee, but you never know, maybe someday we'll reuse that. So that's why I did that. Let's go ahead and say employee.builder inside of the creator update method. On the builder, let's go ahead and say employee type is employee type.admin. Let's go ahead and bring in our employee type so it's not mad at us. We'll say contact information is contact info 1. Our pay information is pay info 1. Our first name is admin. Last name will be employee. Email will be adminemployee@company.com. Password will be passwordencoder.encodepass. Our first time login will be false. Reports to will be null. And reports will be a new array list. Let's go ahead and build this employee object. Looks good. Let's go ahead and copy our employee admin here. Let's go ahead and paste it in. And then let's go ahead and say manager. And then here, let's go ahead and make some changes. So first, we need to go ahead and change the employee type from type admin to type manager. We want to go ahead and do contact info 2 and pay info 2. First name, we'll go ahead and say manager. We'll keep last name as employee, but email, we'll go ahead and say manageremployee@company.com. And then we'll go ahead and keep the rest the same. Let's go ahead and copy our manager here. And then let's go ahead and name it employee. And we need to go ahead and make some more updates as well. So now employee type should be employee type.employee. We want to go ahead and say contact info 3 and pay info 3. And then of course we want to go and update the employee first name to employee. Last name is going to be 1. Email will be employee1@company.com. And now we need to go ahead and say report to is equal to manager instead of null. We need to come down below our employee 1. We need to go ahead and say employee service to update employees reports. Inside, we want to go ahead and pass in manager, employee, and add. Now we have created an admin, a manager, and an employee type. We went ahead and added the employee as a report to the manager, and so on and so forth. So that looks pretty good. I think that basically concludes setting up the new logic inside of our authentication service. So now we go ahead and hop back into the main class of the application and then set it up to load in new employee information. Let's go ahead and hop in there. So here, let's go ahead and inside of run, let's go ahead and wire the authentication service called auth service. Let's go ahead and make sure auth service gets imported here. So import our class. Then let's come inside of the return for the run. Let's go and call auth service.load user information. And now once we finish up setting up the changes that we need inside of the employee controller, because we made some changes to the service that we haven't updated yet, we can go ahead and run this and it should go ahead and generate all those users for us. But if we try to run this right now, it's going to go ahead and have an error because we never went through and actually updated that employee controller. We're going to do that in one of the next sections here, but I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up this section. In the next section, we're going to go ahead and make it so we can actually register the employee inside of the authentication controller. Like I mentioned in the last section, now that we have finished up the logic inside of our employee service as well as the authentication service, we can move forward with updating corresponding controllers. We'll start out by updating the authentication controller. All we really need to do here is set up a new endpoint that allows the admin to actually register an employee. So let's go ahead and hop into our authentication controller. Inside the authentication controller, let's go underneath the post mapping for login employee, and let's go ahead and declare a new public register response, register employee method. Now let's go ahead and bring in our register response so it's not mad at us. Looks good. And then inside of the parameters, let's go ahead and add the @request_body annotation. And our request body is going to be a register request that we call body. Let's go ahead and bring in register request so we can go and access it. Let's come above our method here and add an @post mapping. We're going to go ahead and map this to /register. Now we go ahead and hop inside the method body, which is going to be pretty simple. All we're going to go ahead and do is return authentication service.register employee. And then that should go ahead and do it for our authentication controller. Since we went ahead and created the new register request inside of our authentication controller, now we can go ahead and move along to updating our employee controller. Let's go ahead and hop into our employee controller here. And then the first thing that we want to go ahead and do is just remove this post employee, because this is going to go ahead and be handled by our authentication service now. And that was one of the primary issues. Next, we want to go ahead and bring in a new property or a new dependency. So we're going to go ahead and say private final pay information service. Pay information service. Let's go ahead and import our pay information service here. So that looks good. Now we want to go ahead and update the put updated employee controller method. So instead of passing in body.email and body.employee, now we want to go ahead and just pass in the entire body. So here, let's just go ahead and delete that and just pass in the entire body. And then next up, we want to go ahead and set up a very quick method to actually update the employee's pay information now that we have everything else set up. So let's go ahead and say public employee update employee pay information. Let's go and go inside the method parameters. We want to go ahead and use the @path variable annotation. Inside path variable, let's go ahead and pass in email, and we'll store this in a string email. We also want to go ahead and include an @request body. This will be a pay information body. Let's go and bring in our pay information before going above. And now we need to go ahead and include an @put mapping. Inside the put mapping, we're going to route this to /pay/curly braces email. And now we should be good to go inside of the body itself. So in here, we're going to go ahead and say employee is equal to employee service.read employee by email, and then pass in the email from the path variable. Next, we want to go ahead and say body.setID. We're going to go and set this to employee.getPayInformation.getID. This is basically a lazy way to do this. Then we don't have to pass in the entire information there. I know it's only one field, but maybe we don't know the ID at that specific time. So it makes it a little bit easier for us. So next, we need to go ahead and save this updated pay information in the database. To do this, let's go ahead and declare a pay information variable that we'll call pay information, and then set it equal to pay information service.create pay information with the body that we just updated. Below here, we'll go ahead and say employee.set pay information to that new pay information. And finally, we'll go ahead and return employee service.create or update employee and pass in the updated employee. Let's go ahead and save this, and that should actually do it for all the changes we need inside of both of our controllers. So now in theory, we should be able to actually run the application and then see all the employees inside the database. And then all we have to do after that is just go back into our security configuration class and start setting up the new request matchers that only allow employees that are authenticated and admin role to access the certain routes that we just set up. So first, let's go ahead and run the application and make sure that it starts up properly and make sure I don't need to debug anything. So let's just start it up here. Fingers crossed we didn't break anything. There is a chance that we did because we made a lot of changes, but it looks good. Let's go and open up our web browser and go to the H2 console just to make sure our employees get generated properly. Let's go ahead and load into the H2 console. We'll go ahead and click on employees first. So now you can see that we have one. This report is null. We can see when it was created. We can see that's the admin employee. We have the hash password. 2 is the manager, and then 3 is the employee. Then if we go ahead and actually hop into like pay information, for example, you can see we have our pay amounts, the type, and then when they're updated and created. And then also we go into pay, or we just saw pay information. So let's look at contact information. We have the same thing. So that is looking good. Now we can go ahead and hop back into IntelliJ, and now we can navigate over to our security configuration class and get all the admin role authentication set up. As mentioned in the previous section, all we have left to do to get the admin role working is to go ahead and hop into the security configuration class. So let's go ahead and close out of our other methods here, or other classes, then open up the security configuration class. And what we need to do is something similar to how we have our unprotected routes here. Now we need to go ahead and set up a private method to go ahead and determine our admin routes. So let's go ahead and say private static AMP path request matcher array admin routes. Let's go ahead and open up the method and return a new AMP path request matcher array. And inside, we need to go ahead and start returning some new AMP path request matchers. So first, let's go ahead and say new AMP path request matcher to /auth/register. So only our admins will be able to actually register an employee. Then we want to go ahead and add a new AMP path request matcher for /employee. And we specifically want the /get method. So only our admin can go ahead and view every single employee inside of the database. Next, we want to go ahead and include a new AMP path request matcher for /employee/curly brace email. That's going to be a delete method. So only our admin can remove employees from the system. Makes sense to me. Then we want to go ahead and have a new AMP path request matcher for /employee/pay/curly braces email. And this is the put method. So once again, only admins are allowed to update an employee's pay information. And then finally, we want to go ahead and include a new AMP path request matcher to /employee/, and this one's the put request. So here only the admin is allowed to update the employees like first name, last name, email, things like that. So it looks good. Next, what we need to go ahead and do is actually update this /auth here. This should be /auth/login. Let's not forget to do that. Otherwise, all of the auth is going to be unprotected. And then we can go ahead and come back into our authorized HTTP request. And then we're going to go ahead and come below the permit all for the unprotected. And let's add a new .request matchers method call. Inside the request matchers, let's go ahead and call the admin roles function. And then we want to go ahead and call .hasRole of admin. So now any employee that tries to hit one of the routes inside of this admin routes array here, it's going to have a role of type admin to actually be able to do that. Otherwise, you're going to go ahead and get a 403. That looks pretty good. And now all we have left to do for the back end of this episode is hop into Postman and make sure all the admin routes are working and our other routes are working as well. Now, like I mentioned, the last thing that we have to do for this section of the chapter is to make sure that our admin routes are working. So the first thing that we want to go and do is let's log into the manager. Once again, this is a post request to http://localhost 8000/auth, and this is going to have a body with an email and a password. So we're going to have our employee, our manager, employee@company.com, and pass. This is probably like one of the last times we'll go through how to log in, because at this point it's been 3 chapters. So hopefully you guys have this saved by now. But let's go ahead and log in as the manager. So now to check to see if our admin auth is working, we can go ahead and go to read all employees. If you guys remember, we actually set up read all to only be an admin route. So if we go ahead and try to hit this, we should get a 403 or 401 because we're not authorized to actually hit this route. And you can see we get a 403 forbidden because we're logged in as a manager instead of logged in as an admin. So let's go ahead and actually close out of our login for manager and let's actually log in as an admin and go ahead and send that. So now we can see that we have our admin login. So now if we try to hit read all, we should go ahead and see that we get all of the employees there. Next, we can go ahead and see if we can go ahead and update an employee. So let's go ahead and go to put for update. So here, this is going to be http://localhost 8000/employee. So let's go ahead and just try to name the employee to first employee instead of employee 1. So we go ahead and send this. You should go ahead and see that we get a 200 because once again, we're logged in as an admin. Next, let's go ahead and see if we can update the employee's pay information. So let's go ahead and update pay here. So here there's going to be to http://localhost 8000/employee/pay. And then we updated the email. So now it's going to be firstemployee@company.com. Then let's say that now they're going to go ahead and make $27.50 an hour. Let's go ahead and send that. And now you can see that our employees updated and now they make pay amount is null. So I think maybe this is supposed to be pay amount instead of just amount. Let's go ahead and try again. There we go. So I typoed there. That looks a lot better. So that's good to go. So that is going to be our primary employees. Next, we need to go ahead and make sure we can actually register a new employee. So let's go ahead and go to our register. So this is going to be the http://localhost 8000/auth/register. This is going to be a post request like I mentioned before. And inside the body, we can have a JSON with type. Here we're going to set employee. First name will be second. Last name will be employee. Phone number will set 10 fours basically. Pay type will be hourly. Pay amount will be 35. And reports to will be equal to manager employee at company.com. Again, this is an admin route, so we should be able to go ahead and hit this and it should work. Let's go ahead and send. And now you can see we have another employee. Now the final thing that the admin can do is go ahead and actually delete an employee or basically fire them. So unfortunately for us, if we go ahead and come into first employee here, so there's a delete request to localhost 8000 employee/first employee. They've been a bad noodle here, so unfortunately we have to let them go. So now if we go ahead and send this, we should see a 204 for no content. If we send it again, we should get a 400 because they don't exist anymore. Let's go and hop into our H2 console just to make sure that these changes are persisting inside the database. So let's go ahead and refresh our H2 console. That's fine. Let's go ahead and connect. Here, let's go ahead and click on employees. Now you can see we have 1, 2, and 4. And the first employee is gone. You can see since we just created this employee, our first login is actually set to true. So all of that is looking good. If we go ahead and come into our contact information, we're just going to go ahead and have a phone number for them. And then later on in this series, we're going to go through and allow them to set that up inside of the front end. And then finally, if we go into their pay information, we should see that there's a 35 hourly there. That's going to go ahead and do it for our backend. Now we can go ahead and hop back into the front end code, start setting up some new employee types because we just completely overhauled our employees, and start making it so the admin can start doing their job from their portal on the front end. I have navigated back to our front end here, and what we're going to go ahead and do is we want to open up our types to start out. Let's go ahead and get rid of this. I'm going to go ahead and completely overhaul our employee and all of the types and whatnot. So let's go ahead and come above our interface for employee. And we need to go ahead and declare our employee type. So let's go ahead and say export type employee type is equal to admin or manager or employee. We also need to go ahead and set up our pay type as well. So let's export type pay type is equal to salary or hourly. Then we need to go ahead and set up a data type that has each of the United States in it. To go ahead and save ourselves some time, I'm going to go and copy paste this. And I'll also go ahead and include this inside the code below or inside the comment section below for those who are watching on YouTube. That way you guys don't have to write it all out in either, but this is basically just a type with all of our different US states in it. And finally, we can go ahead and start working on the different types or different interfaces that we need inside of employee. So first, let's go ahead and export an interface called contact information. Inside our contact information, we have an ID, which is a number. We'll have our phone number, which is a string. We'll have our address line 1, which is a string. Address line 2, which is a string. Our state will be the type US_states. We'll have a city of type string. And finally, we'll have a zip code of type string. That looks good for our contact information. Now let's go ahead and export interface pay information. Here, we'll go ahead and have an ID, which is a number. We'll have a pay type of type pay type. And we'll have a pay amount, which is a number. Now we can go ahead and start working on our employee. So let's go ahead and hop into our employee. First, let's go ahead and set an ID of type number. Then we'll go ahead and set up an employee type of type employee type. We'll come below our email, and we're going to go ahead and set up a contact information. We can come below our first and last name. Let's go ahead and set up a first time login of type Boolean. We'll have our pay information of type pay information, and then a report of an employee array. Finally, reports to will be an employee or null. That should go ahead and do it for all of the different types and interfaces that we need for the time being. Let's go ahead and save this up and then hop into our login page to do some work over there. Now that our employee type is set up, let's go and hop into the login page to update the navigate function to actually push the employees to the correct portal. So now inside of our navigate employee to portal, instead of navigating to /portal/admin/myself, let's go and navigate to /portal/ $ curly brace employee question mark dot employee type dot to lowercase. So now instead of just navigating to the admin portal all the time, we'll go ahead and navigate to the correct portal for the employee. So now let's go ahead and hop into our front end and make sure this is actually working. So inside of our employee management, let's go ahead and hop back over here. Let's go ahead and say admin employee. I think I spelled that right. I can't tell. At company.com, and then go ahead and put in a PASS and log in. I think I typoed something. Let's see. Admin employee at company.com and PASS. There we go. So you see we're in the manage employees page. So that's correct. We go ahead and come back in here and go ahead and say manager employee at company.com and then PASS and go ahead and log in. You can see this is manage reports. So that's the correct portal. And then finally, if we go ahead and come back, I think this is still first employee from when we changed it. Actually, what to go second employee at company.com. Put in the password. I think that's correct. We'll see. It's not. Maybe we did restart the application. I'm not 100% sure. Let's check the database really quick. Oh, you know what? It's a temporary password. So let's actually check Postman. So if we come into register, we should have their temporary password here. Let's go ahead and copy this. Let's try to log in. I'm going to probably go ahead and restart our application after this. So we have the first one again, but here you can see portal/employee. So that is working and everything's good to go there. So now we can go ahead and start working on setting up some more stuff to make the application look nicer. Now that we can successfully log in and navigate to the proper portal page for the employee, we can set up the nav bar to replace the placeholder we hard-coded in the layout page. To do this, let's go ahead and open up our project here, go into the components. We're going to go ahead and make a new folder. We're going to go ahead and call this nav bar. Then inside nav bar, let's go ahead and make a new file. Go ahead and call this navbar.tsx. Then we also want to go ahead and create a new file for navbar.css. Let's go ahead and open up the navbar.tsx for now, and then we're going to go ahead and close the project directory as well. First thing that we want to go ahead and do is import the navbar.css. That way we don't forget. Then we want to go ahead and set up an interface called navbarprops. Inside our navbar props, let's go ahead and include the property of type string, and then we need to go ahead and create another interface called navitem. And inside our nav item, we're going to have a text of type string, and we're going to have a route of type string as well. Those look good. Let's go ahead and say export constant navbar, which is a react.fc arrow function. Let's go ahead and set up our props. So let's go ahead and come below the react.fc and add our navbar props inside of our angled brackets. And then to break the props apart, let's go ahead and include an object with type inside of it inside of the method parameters. Go and open up our component here. Let's go ahead and create a quick return statement. Inside the return, let's go ahead and set up a nav with a class name of navbar and space between. And that should go ahead and make the compiler happy long enough for us to go up above it and start working on the logic and the state. First thing we want to do is we need a way to actually navigate from place to place on top of the navbar. So to do this, let's go ahead and say const navigate is equal to use navigate. Let's go ahead and import our use navigate from our React router DOM. Looks good. Then let's come below here. And then now we need to go ahead and set up the different nav items that we're going to go ahead and display. Let's first start out by saying const admin items is a nav item array equal to an empty array. Inside, we're going to go ahead and have an object with the text of manage employees and routes equal to portal/admin. Then we need another object with the text of manage self and route of portal/admin/myself. That's going to be our admin items for the navbar. Next, let's go ahead and create a const manager items, which is a nav item array equal to an empty array. Inside of manager items, let's go ahead and create an object with the text of manage employees and route equal to portal/manager. Below this, let's go ahead and create another object with text of employee timesheets and route equal to portal/manager/timesheets. And then finally, let's go ahead and have one more object with the text of manage self and route equal to portal/manager/myself. Finally, we need the different routes for our employee object. For our employee types, let's go ahead and say const employee items is equal to a nav item array equal to an empty array. Inside, we'll go ahead and have an object with manage self and route equal to portal/employee. Then we'll have another object with text equal to timesheets and route equal to portal/employee/timesheets. Let's go ahead and do it for our different navbar items. Now we need to go ahead and create a function that will determine which navbar items to actually render. So let's go ahead and say const navbar items is equal to an arrow function. Inside the arrow function, we're going to go ahead and set up a switch statement on type. And inside the switch statement, if the case is admin, then we're going to go ahead and return the admin items. If the case is manager, then we'll go ahead and return the manager items. Otherwise, we'll have a default case where we're going to go ahead and return the employee items. I believe that should go ahead and do it for our logic and state here. So now let's go ahead and come into our navbar here. The first thing we want to go ahead and do is create a new div with a class name equal to row and navbar logo. Let's go ahead and open up this div, and inside we're going to go ahead and have a font awesome icon component. Let's go ahead and make sure we import our font awesome icon. Then inside the icon, we're going to go ahead and have an icon equal to FA globe and size equal to 3x. Let's go ahead and import our FA globe icon here. This is going to come from our for awesome /free solid SVGs. You could do the default one as well, but I'm just going to go ahead and import it like that. That's fine. Then below our font awesome icon, we want to go ahead and have an H2 that says company. And that looks good to me. Let's go ahead and come below our navbar logo div. And now we want another div that has a class name of center and navbar links. Inside here, we're going to go ahead and say navbar items. We want to go ahead and call .map through each item. Let's go ahead and open this up. Here we need a return statement. Open up the return. We'll have a div with a class name of center and navbar item. We also need to go ahead and include the key is equal to item.text. And we'll set an on click is equal to navigate to item.route. We'll go ahead and close this div. Make sure we close it all the way. And then inside the div, we want to go ahead and do a little bit of work as well. We're going to go ahead and have an H5 with item.text. That should go ahead and do it our regular routes. Let's go ahead and come out of our navbar items map here. And below, we want to go ahead and have another div with a class name of center and navbar item. Inside here, we're simply going to have an H5 with the text of logout. So that is the basic logic and structure of our navbar. So let's go ahead and hop into the CSS and go ahead and style it up so it looks good. So inside of our navbar.css, let's go ahead and start out with our .navbar class. Inside, we'll set the height to 5 rem. We'll set the padding to 0 and 2 rem. The background color will be var -- primary. And we're going to go ahead and set up a box shadow of 0, 4px, 8px, 0px, and var -- primary. You can omit this part if you don't like the way it looks, but it's basically just going to go ahead and give it a little bit of a gradient below the navbar. I think it adds a little bit, but again, if you don't love it, that's fine. We can go ahead and omit that part. Next, we want to go ahead and set up the class for the .navbar logo. Inside our logo, we'll have a height 100%. And we'll go ahead and have a padding of 1 rem 0. After our logo, let's go ahead and set up the class for our navbar links. Inside of here, we're going to set height to 100%. We want a gap of 0.25 rem. And then we need to go ahead and have a .navbar item class. Inside our navbar item, we'll go ahead and have a width to fit content. We'll set a padding of 0, 1 rem, set the border to none, and the outline to none. Then we need to go ahead and set up a navbar item : hover. Inside the hover, let's go ahead and set the cursor to pointer. Set the background color to var secondary, and set the color to var text secondary. That should go ahead and do it for all of our styles. Now we should be able to just go ahead and add this into our layout page. As I mentioned before, that's going to do it for all of our navbar styles and our layouts. So let's go ahead and hop into the layout page so that whenever the employee logs in, they're going to go ahead and see the proper navbar. So like I mentioned, let's hop into that layout page. So here we are, layout page.tsx. And what we want to go ahead and do is above where we have the employee and we want to go ahead and include another check for employee being logged in. And this time we want to go ahead and render the navbar component with type equal to employee.employeetype.to lowercase. Let's go ahead and import our navbar. So now whenever the employee logs in, they should go ahead and see a navbar that's going to go ahead and have items depending on who they are. So let's go ahead and just start logging into different accounts and making sure that the navbar looks good, and also making sure we can go ahead and navigate to the different pages that we need to go ahead and be able to navigate to. So let's go ahead and hop into the browser for that. So let's go ahead and log out here, and then let's go ahead and log into the admin, and this is going to be admin employee at company.com. Go ahead and put in pass and sign in. So now you can see that we have manage employees, which is the page that we're on. We go to manage self, it goes to the manage self page. Log out's not going to do anything right now. That's fine. Let's go ahead and go back to the login. Let's go ahead and go to the manager employee at company.com. Let's go ahead and put in our password and log in. So again, we have our managed employees, which is the main page. We have employee timesheets where we review timesheets. We have our managed self. We can go ahead and see our information. And then again, log out doesn't do anything, so it looks good. Let's go back to the portal, login portal one more time. Again, let's go ahead and say second employee at company.com. .com. And then here, let's go ahead and get the password from Postman again. So once again, let's go and copy this. We don't have a way to reset this yet. Eventually we will. But for now, let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and send it. Now we can see that we have the portal employee. We have our timesheet, so we can switch between those pages, and it all looks good. So with all of that being good, we can go ahead and hop back into the code and get to work on what we want to work on next. Now that we have our navigation and layout page all set up the way we want for now, let's get to work on setting up the admins portal page, or here we're going to be calling it the manage employees page. To do this, let's go and open up our project explorer here, and then inside of pages, let's go and make a new file. It's going to go ahead and be manage employees page.tsx, and we also want to go ahead and create a new file. We'll go ahead and call this manage employees page.css. And that should look good. Let's go ahead and close out of our project explorer here and go ahead and open up our manage employees page. We can also go ahead and close out of some of the files that we were working on previously. The first thing that we want to go ahead and do is import the manage employees page.css. Then we go ahead and say export default function manage employees page. And inside, we'll go ahead and set up a quick return statement. Inside the return statement, let's go and have a div with a class name of page container. And inside of our page container, we're going to go ahead and have the manage employees text. That looks good. Now we have our skeleton. Let's go ahead and add this to the app.tsx really quick. Save this, go into our app.tsx, and then inside of our portal/admin, instead of having manage employees page, let's go ahead and have a manage employees page like so, and import that. That looks good to go, and save it. And now we can go ahead and continue working to start fetching the employees to display on here and actually test it out after we have those fetched. As I mentioned in the last section, now that we have the skeleton manage employees page set up, and inside of the portal here, or inside of the route for our portal/admin, inside of our app.tsx, we need a way to actually fetch all of the employees information. To do this, we need to set up an employee service on our front end here. So let's go ahead and open up our Explorer here. Inside of our services, let's go ahead and make a new file. We're going to go ahead and call this employee service. .ts. Let's go ahead and hop into here and close out of this. So the first thing we need to do inside of our employee service is actually generate a type that's going to go ahead and say all the reducers that we have access to. So let's go ahead and say export type employee service type. Inside of the employee service type, we're just going to have one thing for the time being, and it's going to be a fetch all employees, which is a arrow function that returns void. And then now we can come below and let's go ahead and say export default function use employee service. Inside of the function parameters, we want to go ahead and pass in a logged in employee, which is an employee or undefined. We want to pass in a request of type Axios. We want to go ahead and pass in reducers, which is of type global context reducers. Let's go ahead and start importing this. So let's try to import our employee here. From types, we'll go ahead and import Axios from Axios. We'll go ahead and import our global context reducers from global context. Finally, we want to make sure that this function is going to go ahead and return an employee service type. Let's go and open up our function here. The first thing that we need to go ahead and do is gain access to our update employees reducer. So let's go ahead and say const object update employees is equal to reducers. It's going to be mad at us for a moment because we're not actually using it, but we will in a second. Then we want to go ahead and say const fetch all employees is equal to an async arrow function. Inside here, let's go ahead and set up a try block. We'll also go ahead and set up a catch block. If we happen to catch an error, we'll go ahead and just console.log e. Then inside the try, let's go ahead and say const res is equal to await request.get /employee/. Then if this is successful, we'll go ahead and say let filtered employees be an employee array equal to res.data. And then whenever we fetch the employees for the admin, we don't actually want to include the admin themselves in the list because we don't want them updating their own pay information. For example, we'd want another admin employee to do that. So let's go ahead and set our filtered employees equal to filtered employees.filter. And inside filter, we're going to go ahead and pass an emp for employee, and arrow function emp.id is not equal to logged in employee ?.id. So basically going to go ahead and return all of the employees except for the employee that is logged in. And then finally, let's go ahead and say update employees with filtered employees. Now that should go ahead and make that happy. The last thing that we need to go ahead and do is actually return an object. That way we actually fulfill the contract that we have up here. So let's go ahead and say return object. Inside the return, let's simply go ahead and pass in fetch all employees. So that should go ahead and do it for a very basic employee service. Now what we need to go ahead and do is actually add the employee service to the global context. So let's go ahead and deal with that. As I mentioned in the previous step, let's go ahead and open up our global context to be able to access our employee service. The first thing I want to go ahead and do is come up to our global context type, and let's go ahead and include an employee service of type employee service type. We need to go ahead and import this employee service type. That is fine. Then we need to go ahead and come down here below our authentication service. Let's go ahead and declare const employee service is equal to use employee service. Inside of this function, let's go ahead and pass in the employee, our Axios request, and reducers. Finally, we need to go ahead and import our use employee service. We also need to go ahead and update our value to also include the employee service. And that should go ahead and fix all the errors we have. And this should also allow us to go ahead and use this global context to access our employee service to fetch those employees. We are now ready to start implementing the different components that will make up our manage employees page. And some of these components will also be used elsewhere in other components and pages. To start out, we need to set up an information card component to render different pieces of information similarly across the application. To that, let's go ahead and make a new directory inside our components. We go ahead and call this information card. And then inside of information card, let's go ahead and make a new file. Let's go and call this information card.tsx. And then let's also go ahead and make a new file and call this information card.css. Looks good. We can also go ahead and close out of some of the stuff we don't need, like a global context, employee service app. And we can go ahead and keep the manage employees page.tsx open. Let's go ahead and close out of the CSS. Let's go into the information card.tsx. The first thing that we want to go ahead and do is import our CSS. So let's go ahead and say import./information card.css. Then we want to go ahead and create a new interface for the props that we're going to include. So let's go ahead and say interface information card props. Inside our interface, we want to go ahead and include one property. This is going to go ahead and be children, which is a react.react node. That looks good. Let's go ahead and come outside of information props. Let's go ahead and say export const information card, which is a react fc arrow function. Let's go ahead and come after our react.fc and include our angled brackets with information card props to include our props. And let's come inside of the function parameters and pass in an object with children to go ahead and break apart those props. Now let's come inside of our function here. Let's go ahead and set up our return statement. Inside the return, let's go ahead and create a div with a class name of column and information card. And then inside of this div, we just want to go ahead and render the children props. Let's go ahead and save that. And that's actually going to go ahead and do it for this component. It's very simple, but we just want to go ahead and have a simple container/card to go ahead and render different pieces of information across our application. So now that the HTML is done, let's go ahead and hop into the CSS. And the first thing I want to go ahead and do is declare our .information card class. Inside our information card, we're going to go ahead and set a width to 100%. We'll set our padding to 0.75 rem. We'll set the background color to var foreground. We want to set the border to 1px solid and then var border color. Let's set the border radius to var border large. Box shadow will be var box shadow. And finally, we'll set a row gap of 0.5 rem. We also want to come below here and set up a .information card and then h5 for whenever we are going to define some h5s or headers inside the information card. Inside our h5, we want to go ahead and set the height to 3.125 rem. Now that looks pretty good. Now we're ready to go ahead and start using this component instead of other components to make up our manage employees page and other pages as well. As I mentioned at the end of the last section, now that we have a simple information card component completed, we can now start working on more complicated card components. First up is the card component that renders all the employees on the manage employee page. Let's go and open up our project directory here. Go and close out of a few things that we don't need open. Let's go and make a new directory. We're going to go ahead and call this employees card with an S. Let's go and make a new file. We're going to go and say employees card.tsx. Let's go and open that up. Since we're going to be using the information card we just set up in the last section, we don't actually need any CSS. The first thing we want to go ahead and do inside of employee cards.tsx is set up an interface for employee cards props. Inside of our employee cards props, we're going to go ahead and need a header of type string. We're going to want an employees, which is an employee array. We're going to need to go ahead and import employee from our types file. And then finally, we want to go ahead and set a display employee property, which is of type Boolean. That looks good for our props. Now let's go ahead and come below and say export const employees card, which is a react.fc equal to an arrow function. Let's go ahead and set up the props by including the employee card props inside of angled brackets after our react.fc. And then let's go inside of the function parameters here and pass in an object with header employees and display edit employee to go ahead and break apart those props for easier use. That looks good. Let's go ahead and hop inside of our function and let's quickly go ahead and set up a return statement. Inside the return statement, let's go ahead and simply return an information card component that we just set up in the last episode. Let's go ahead and make sure we import our information card. That way it's not mad at us. And then this also needs child props, so let's also go ahead and render a div with a class name of space between. Now that shouldn't be angry at us. The only thing that matters is we're not using any of our props yet, but we're going to go ahead and use that to render different things and also set up different logic. So now that we have our basic structure and the compiler's not mad at us, let's go and set up the logic and state that we need. The first thing we need to go ahead and do is gain access to our authentication service. So to do this, we're going to go ahead and say const, and then inside of curly braces, authentication service is equal to use global context as global context type. Let's go ahead and import our use global context hook. We'll also go ahead and bring in our global context object or type as well. And then now we're actually ready to go ahead and continue working inside the card. Let's come inside of the div that has the space between. Let's go ahead and have an H3 that renders our header from the props. Below this header, we're going to go ahead and check to see if we should display edit employee. So if we should go ahead and display edit employee, let's go ahead and render a button component. Let's go and import button. Inside, we should have a type equal to primary. The width will be 20%. And for the time being, handle click is just going to go ahead and be an arrow function that does nothing. Let's go ahead and close this button out. And then inside the button, let's go and have a div with the class name of center. And let's also set up a style with the gap of 0.5 rem. Inside this div, let's go ahead and include a font awesome icon. Let's go and import that font awesome icon, and the icon will be equal to FA+. Let's go ahead and also import our FA+ icon. Looks good. And then let's come below here and also add in the text, add employee. So that's going to go ahead and actually do it for our employees card for the time being. We need to go ahead and go through and set up a few more things to be able to actually start editing the employee and a couple other things. So let's go ahead and work on that next. Now that we have a button to create an employee here, we need to actually go ahead and go and update the authentication service to actually be able to create an employee. So let's go ahead and hop into the authentication service here. And inside the authentication service, we need to go ahead and start out by setting a couple of new properties inside of our authentication service type. The first, we want to go ahead and add a creating employee, which is Boolean. And then below our submit login, we also want to go ahead and add an update creating employee, which is a function that takes in a payload type Boolean and returns void. So now that we have our new properties inside the type setup, we can go ahead and come inside of our user authentication service, start setting this up. First thing we need to go ahead and do is set up a new state. So I'm going to go ahead and come in below our employee authentication error. And then let's go ahead and say const creating employee and set creating employee is equal to a use state of type Boolean and set that equal to false to start. And then we can go ahead and come in below our submit login and go ahead and create our next property here. It's going to go ahead and be a const creating employee, which is an arrow function. And then inside of our parameters, we're going to go ahead and pass payload of type Boolean. And then let's go and open up our function. Here, we're going to go ahead and call set creating employee with that payload. Finally, we need to go ahead and include these new properties inside of a return statement. Let's go ahead and just copy our creating employee from up here. We can go ahead and paste it here. And then let's go ahead and add our comma. And then below submit login, let's also go ahead and include our update creating employee as well, and then include it there. That looks good. Now we should be able to hop back into our employees card to be able to continue working, to be able to click on that button and update an employee. Now back inside the employees card, let's go ahead and make use of that new update creating employees reducer that we just created inside the authentication service. That way we can go ahead and update a form to create the employee whenever we want. To do this, let's go ahead and update the handle click right here on the button that we set up. And instead of doing nothing, what we wanted to go ahead and do is we want to call the authentication service the update creating employee with true. Now, whenever we click on this button, it'll go ahead and set that value to true inside of authentication service. And then we can go ahead and use that logic to be able to actually update the employee. Now, before we can actually update the employee, we need some way of actually storing the information that we're going to pass to the backend. So let's go ahead and hop into the types and get that set up. As I mentioned in the last section, we need to go ahead and hop into the types.ts file to go ahead and set up a couple of types to be able to send and receive data from our backend to actually do the registering of the employee. So let's go ahead and scroll down to below where we have our other properties here. And the first thing we need to go ahead and do is create a new interface called register employee payload. Let's go ahead and say export interface register employee payload. And inside of our interface, we first want to go ahead and say a type of employee type. Then we want to go ahead and have a first name of type string. We want a last name of type string. We'll have a phone number of type string. Then we'll have the employee's pay type of type pay type. We'll have the pay amount, which is a number. And finally, we'll have reports to, which is a string or null. Gotta go ahead and do it for our register employee payload. We also need to go ahead and have a new interface for whenever we successfully register the new employee. So let's go ahead and say export interface new employee login. For our new employee login, we're going to go ahead and have an email of type string, and we're going to have a temporary password of type string. Now that we have our payloads all set up, we can go ahead and hop into the authentication service and start working on the logic to actually send and receive these requests. As I mentioned in the last section, let's go and hop into the authentication service once again, and then we're going to go ahead and put these new types to use to be able to actually register a new employee. First thing that we need to go ahead and do is start by adding in the new properties in the authentication service type. Let's go ahead and come up here. We're going to go ahead and add in a couple new properties as well as a new submit register reducer here. So first, let's go ahead and include a new employee's credential, which is going to be a new employee login or undefined. Let's go and import our new employee login from our types. Let's come below. Next, we need an employee creation error, which is of type Boolean. We also want a saving new employee, which is of type Boolean. Then let's also come below our update creating employee. And let's go ahead and say submit register, which is a arrow function, which takes in a payload of register employee payload and employees of employee array. And this will return void. Let's go ahead and import our register employee payload. And then let's also go ahead and import our employee from our types. And now we can go ahead and start setting up the different properties and the logic inside of our authentication service. So first thing that we need to go ahead and do is we actually need to gain access to the update employees reducer from our global context, because whenever we go ahead and register a new employee, it's going to be added into the list of all the employees that the admin can actually see. Let's go ahead and add a comma here, and then let's go ahead and say update employees as well inside this object. Looks good. It's going to complain for a little bit because we're not using it, but that's completely fine. Let's come below our state here and let's go ahead and set up a const new employee credentials, and set new employee credentials is equal to use state of type new employee login or undefined. We're going to go ahead and start this out as undefined. Then we'll also go ahead and have our const employee creation error, and set employee creation error is equal to use state of a Boolean, and we'll set this to false to start out. Finally, we need to go ahead and set up our const saving new employee, and set saving new employee, which is equal to a use state of type Boolean, and set this to false as well. Now that we have all of our state set up, let's come down below our update creating employee. And now we want to go ahead and declare our const submit register, which is equal to an async arrow function. Inside of the method parameters, we want to go ahead and include the payload of type register employee payload and employees of type employee array. Now let's come inside of the function here and let's set up a try block. We'll also go ahead and set up a catch really quickly. And then inside the catch, we'll start out by saying console.log e to make the linter happy. And then below our console.log e, let's go ahead and set the employee creation error to true. So if we catch an error while we are trying to register, we'll go ahead and say, hey, there is an error, and let the front end know. Otherwise, let's come back inside of our try block and say set saving new employee equal to true. And when we first start trying to save it, let's also go ahead and set the employee creation error to false. Now that we have our state updated, let's go ahead and say const res is equal to await request.post. Inside of the .post, let's go ahead and make the request to /auth/register. And we'll also go ahead and pass in the payload from above. Then if that request is successful, we're going to go ahead and say set new employee credentials. And inside of our set new employee credentials, we're going to set email to res.data.employee.email. And we're going to set the temporary password to res.data.temporary password. Then we want to come in below our set update employee credentials. We want to go ahead and declare a const updated employees, which is equal to a new array. And then inside this new array, we want to go ahead and say ... employees. And then we'll also go ahead and pass in the res.data.employee. Now come below our updated employees, and we want to go ahead and call update employees reducer with those updated employees. Before we finish this function, we want to go ahead and include a finally block to go ahead and clear out all the state, even if we have failed the request. Inside the finally, we just want to go ahead and call set saving new employee to false, because even if we did fail, we're still technically done saving the new employee. That is all of our logic and state for the authentication service. The last thing we need to go ahead and do is include it inside of our return statement. So let's go ahead and include the new employee credentials. We'll include the employee creation error. We'll include saving new employee. Finally, we'll come in below our update creating employee, and we'll go ahead and also include submit register. That looks good. Our authentication service is all happy again, and now we're ready to move on to continue working on creating a new employee. Now, the final thing we need to be able to create a new employee is a way to select an option from a drop-down menu on a form. To this, let's go ahead and create a new form component. So let's go ahead and come in here, go into our form, and we're going to make a new file. We're going to go ahead and call this form select.tsx. Let's go ahead and open this up and close out of our project here. We want to go ahead and start out by saying interface form select props. And inside of our form select props, we're going to go ahead and start out with a label of type string. We also want a name of type string. We'll have values of type string array. We'll have an optional default value of type string. And finally, we'll have a handle input, which is a arrow function that takes in a react.change event on an HTML select element and returns void. Now that we have our prop set up, let's go and say export const form select is a react.fc arrow function. Let's go and set up the props by including the angled brackets with the form select props after the react.fc. And then inside of our function parameters, let's go and include an object with a label, a name, values, default value equal to an empty string, and handle input to go ahead and break apart those props and make it easier to use. Let's go ahead and come inside of our function here. And first, let's go ahead and start out by setting up a return statement. Inside the return statement, let's start with a simple div. Inside the div, let's have a label with HTML4 equal to name. And we'll set the class name equal to employee management form label. Inside the label component, let's go ahead and render the label from our props. And let's come below our label and have a select with an ID equal to name. We'll have a class name equal to employee management form input. Name would be equal to name from our props. And onChange will equal to handle input from our props. Then let's come inside of our select here. And we're going to go ahead and say values.map inside of curly braces. Inside of the map function, we're going to go ahead and pass in value and index. And then let's set up the arrow function. Inside the arrow function, we're going to go ahead and first check if default value is equal to value. If this is the case, we're going to go ahead and return an option with a key of IDX. And we're going to go ahead and set the value equal to value. And finally, we want to say selected. Inside of the option, we're going to go ahead and render value. Let's come below our if statement. Otherwise, we're just going to go ahead and have a return statement. Inside the return statement, we'll return an option with a key equal to IDX again. We'll have the value equal to value. And inside, once again, we'll go ahead and render that value. That should go ahead and do it for the last piece of form here that we need to be able to actually create the employee form. So now that being said, we can go ahead and get into the actual form that will be able to register our employee for us. As I mentioned in the last section, now that we have the submit register reducer complete and authentication service, and we have all the components we need to set the register form, let's go ahead and get the register form all set up. To this, let's go ahead and hop back into our components here. Go and make a new directory. Let's go ahead and call this create employee form. We'll go ahead and make a new file. Go and call this create employee form.tsx. We're also going to go ahead and create a new file and a create employee form.css. We can go ahead and close out of like things like the form select. I think I might have spelled that incorrectly. I did. Let's go ahead and make sure this is spelled properly. Let's rename this to form select. It shouldn't cause any issues because we called it form select in here and we haven't used it yet, but that was a good catch. We can also go ahead and close out of the authentication service for now. We don't need our types. We'll keep the other two things open because we will be using it a little bit later on. Let's go ahead and close out of our Explorer and keep our create employee form open for the TSX. First, let's go ahead and import our /create employee form.css. Below, let's go ahead and say export const create employee form is a react.fc arrow function. This isn't going to take any props. Let's go ahead and come below and set up a return statement. Inside the return statement, let's go ahead and have a div with a class name of create employee form background and center. And now that we have a basic return statement set up, we can go ahead and come back up top and start working on the state and logic without the compiler completely yelling at us. The first thing that we need to go ahead and do is set up a new initial state variable. To do this, let's go ahead and say const initial state is a register employee payload equal to an object. We're going to need to go ahead and import our register employee payload, and then it's going to be mad at us because we don't have it filled out. So let's go ahead and say type is employee. First name will be an empty string. Last name will be an empty string. Phone number will be an empty string. Pay type will be hourly. Pay amount will be 0.0 to start, and it reports to a start out as null. Now let's come below our initial state object, and then let's go ahead and get access to our authentication service and our employees. So let's go ahead and say const object employees authentication service is equal to use global context as global context type. Let's go and import our use global context hook. And also import our global context type as well from our global context. And let's come below and set up our state. We're going to start by saying const create employee and set create employee is equal to use state of type register employee payload, and then pass in that initial state that we set up above. We need to go ahead and import our use state here, like so. I don't know why this didn't import, so let's make sure this actually imports correctly. There we go. That looks good. Now we can go ahead and start setting up the event listeners for our logic. Let's go ahead and say const handle input change is equal to an arrow function. Inside the parameters, we want to go ahead and say this takes in an event, which is a react.change event on an HTML input element. Then inside the function, we simply want to go ahead and say set create employee. Inside the object, we'll go ahead and say ... create employee to go ahead and keep everything the same. And then to change a specific element or property inside this object, we're going to go ahead and say square brackets e.target.name : e.target.value. So as we change things inside of our form, we'll go ahead and check what the name of the field that we're changing is, and then go ahead and set it to the target from that event. We still need to do a little bit more logic, so let's come below the set create employee. We want to go ahead and set a check for if e.target.name is equal to reports to, and the e.target.value of that reports to is equal to a empty string. If we have set our reports to an empty string, we want to go ahead and make sure that gets set to null. That way in the back end, we can also set to null. So let's go ahead and once again call set create employee. Once again, we'll say ... create employee, and we'll set reports to null. Now we can come below here. Let's also go ahead and set up a const handle select change for whenever we change things in the select input. Inside of the parameter here, we're going to say this takes in an event, which is a React.change event on an HTML select element. Let's open up our function once again, and let's go ahead and call set create employee. Once again, we'll go ahead and say ... create employee. And we'll also go ahead and include our e.target.name inside square brackets : e.target.value. Some of the keen-eyed of you might kind of recognize here that this could have been one function, and it definitely could have been. This is something that kind of slipped in the nets with my refactoring period, but it works out the same, so it's fine. If you guys do want to go ahead and combine these by adding like an OR operator here and then adding in the HTML select element, that is perfectly valid as well, but this works, so I'm not going to go ahead and try to break everything. The final thing that we need to go ahead and do is set up a handler for whenever we submit our form to register the employee. Let's go ahead and say const handle create employee is equal to an AR function. Let's come inside of our function parameter, and let's go ahead and say that this is going to take in an event of type react.mouseEvent on an HTML button element. Let's come inside of our function here. The first thing I want to go ahead and do is call e.preventDefault. That way the form doesn't do anything funky. And then we want to go ahead and call authentication service.submitRegister. Inside the submit register, we'll go ahead and pass in create employee in the employees list from above. And that should go ahead and register the employee and update our global state. We need to do one final thing, which is going to be go ahead and clear out the initial state whenever we leave this component. So to do that, let's go ahead and set up a use effect really quickly. Let's go ahead and import our use effect. And then open up the actual effect here, and then we're going to go ahead and say return an arrow function. And then inside the arrow function, we're going to go ahead and say set create employee to initial states. And if you're new to React, basically what this is going to do, especially if you leave this open here or nothing inside of it, is this will basically set it up to be like a component did unmount. So anytime we close out the component, the use effect will run this return statement at the end before we close everything out. And we can make sure to go ahead and reset the form state. That way, if we go through and like open this up later or something, it's completely cleared out. We don't see any remnants of what we were working on before. So say that you close out of it before you save or something on accident. Obviously, that might be a little bit annoying, but a lot of people, they might start registering and then they close out of it. You don't want the remnants there. We want to go ahead and clean that up. So that looks good. So now we can go ahead and start working inside of our return statement once again. This might get a little bit complicated, so I'm going to go ahead and try to keep it as simple as possible here. The first thing we want inside of our form background is we want to go ahead and set a div, the class name equal to create employee form modal. Let's come inside of this new div, and we want to go ahead and create another div with the class name equal to create employee form modal top. Then we can go ahead and open up this div. Inside this div, we're going to have a div with a class name equal to center and create employee form modal close. We're also going to come below our class name and include an onClick, which is an arrow function that calls authentication service.update creating employee to false. Let's go ahead and close the div. Inside the div, let's go ahead and include a font awesome icon component. Let's go ahead and ensure that we import that, and then we're going to go ahead and say icon is FAX. Let's go ahead and ensure that we import our FAX. So then we want to come outside of our close button here, or close div, whatever we want to call it. We want to go ahead and set up a new H3 that says create new employee. And that should go ahead and do it for the top. So now we want to go ahead and come outside of our top div. So here we want to come outside this div and just be inside of the form modal. And we're going to go ahead and set up a check for authentication service.new employee credentials. And here we're going to have question mark and then do a empty fragment or an empty fragment. So here, let's go and just clean this up a little bit. So we'll have our question mark, and then we'll go ahead and do one of these, clean this up. Clean that up, that way it just looks a little bit nicer. And then if we do happen to have a new employee's credential, let's also go ahead and render a div with the class name of column. And we'll go ahead and set style equal to a width of 34 rem. Let's make sure this div properly gets closed here. That way nothing's broken and come inside of it. So in here we'll have another div with nothing in it. Being a little bit difficult here, but it is what it is. And then inside here we'll have an H3 with employees new email. And below the H3 we'll go ahead and have a P tag, which is going to go ahead and render authentication service.new employee credentials.email. And let's go ahead and come below this div and set up another div. Inside this div, let's go ahead and have an H3 with temporary password. Below this H3 we'll also have a P tag with authentication service.new employee credentials.temporary password. Now we'll come outside the second div where we're going to go ahead and have a P tag that says please share this information with the new hire. So if we have successfully registered the new employee, that means we'll have new employee credentials inside of our authentication service. And we'll go ahead and display a modal that just states, hey, here's the employee's information to log in. Go ahead and give that to them. That way they can log in successfully. Let's go ahead and delete the fragment here. If we haven't yet successfully registered the employee, let's go ahead and render our form component. Let's go ahead and make sure that we import our form component. There we go, that looks good. And then let's come inside to set up a few properties inside of it. Let's go ahead and say the button text is equal to create new employee. Let's go ahead and say the error is equal to authentication service.employee creation error. Our error message will be unable to create employee. The action will be handle create employee. Width will be set to 34 rem. We'll go ahead and set the height to authentication service.employee creation error question mark. If there is an error, we'll do 31.25 rem. Otherwise, we'll do 29 rem. That's all the properties. Let's go ahead and see what's going on with our action here. So e.react mouse event void is not assignable to type string. Let's see if I did something wrong here. So here we have our handle create employee, which is a arrow function here. I might have accidentally messed this up. Let's go ahead and check the action for a form. So I wonder if I typoed something somewhere. This should be a void action. I'm not sure why this is mad. Let me just do a double check here inside of our create employee form. Close out of this. I'm not sure why this is getting angry at us. You know what? I think that it imported form from the wrong place. Let's just double check. Yes, it did. Gotta be careful about that. So let's go ahead and make sure this form has come from the right property. And make sure it comes from .form. There we go. That's why I also wasn't mad that we didn't have any logic inside of it. So now for the children inside of it, let's go ahead and set up some curly braces with authentication service.saving new employee question mark, and we'll do a open fragment, otherwise another empty fragment. So if we are saving employee, let's go ahead and just clean this up a little bit to make it look a little bit easier to read here. So if we are saving a new employee, we want to go ahead and just render the loading spinner. Let's go and import our loading component, which is just that spinner that we created. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and open up these fragments. And the first thing we want to go ahead and do inside the fragment is set up a div with a class name with space between. Inside space between, we're going to go ahead and have a form input. Let's go ahead and make sure we import our form input. And then let's also go ahead and do one of these because we're going to set up some props. First, we need a type of string. We need to set the label to first name. We'll set the name to first name. Placeholder will be employee first name. Content will be create employee.firstname. And our handle input is going to be handle input change. Let's come below this form input and let's go ahead and set up another form input. Inside this form input, let's go ahead and set the type to string again. We'll go ahead and set the label to last name. We'll set the name to last name. We'll set placeholder to employee last name. We'll set content to create employee.lastname. We'll set handle input equal to handle input change. And that'll go ahead and do it for our form input for our last name. Let's come below our space between div really quickly, maybe. And then go ahead and set up another form input. Inside this form input, let's go ahead and say type string once again. Then we'll have the label equal to contact number. Name will be phone number. Placeholder will be employee contact. Content will be create employee.phone number. And handle input will be equal to handle input change. There's our input for their phone number. Below this, let's go and have another div with a class name with space between. Inside, let's start out with a form select component. Let's go and make sure we import our form select from our form folder. That looks good. Let's open this up. Let's go and say label is equal to employee type. The name will be type. For values, we're going to go ahead and pass an array of employee, manager, and admin. For the default value, we'll set it to employee. And finally, our handle input will be handle select change. Let's come below our form select and go ahead and have another form input. Inside this form input, type will be string. Label will be reports to. The name will be reports to. Placeholder will be employee manager. Content will be create employee.reports to or an empty string. And finally, handle input will be handle input change. That looks good for the employee type in their manager. Finally, let's come below this space between div and set up another div with a class name of space between. Inside here, let's go ahead and have another form select component. Inside the form select, let's go ahead and say label is employee pay type. We'll go ahead and have name is equal to pay type. Values would be an array with hourly and salary. If we want to, we could also go ahead and set default equal to hourly. And finally, we'll go ahead and say handle input is equal to handle select change. Let's come below our form select and set up one final form input. Inside the form input, let's go ahead and set type equal to number. Our label will be employee pay. We'll also go ahead and set name equal to pay amount. Placeholder will be 0.00. Content equal to create employee.pay amount. And handle input will be handle input change. Let's go and save our create employee form. That should basically be all of the form inputs and everything else that we need to actually go ahead and create an employee. Now we need to actually go ahead and style this up before we actually place it inside of our component. Let's go ahead and hop into the CSS. First thing we want to go ahead and do is say .create employee form background. Inside our background, we're going to go ahead and have a width of 100 VW. Our height will be 100 VH. The position will be absolute. We're going to set top to 0 and left to 0. Then we want to go ahead and set the background color to RGBA 000.5. And we'll set a Z index to 10 to kind of render this on top of the page. Then let's go ahead and set up the .create employee form modal. Inside the modal class, we'll go ahead and say padding is 0.5 rem, 1 rem, 1 rem, and 1 rem. We'll have a border radius of border large. Set the background color to var background. And we'll go ahead and set a box shadow to box shadow. That looks good. Let's come below and let's go ahead and set up the .create employee form modal close. Inside the close class, let's go ahead and say the width is 2.25 rem, the height is 2.25 rem, and we'll set border radius to 100%. Then we want to go ahead and set up .create employee form modal close : hover. Inside the hover, let's go ahead and say cursor is pointer. And we'll go ahead and set the background color to RGBA 0.1 to have a light transparent background. That should go ahead and do it for all of the structure and styling of our create employee form. Now we can go ahead and make use of this guy inside of the manage employees page and hopefully be able to actually create an employee from the front end instead of just making a postman request. Now I want to go ahead and head back into the manage employees page to include the create employee form along with the employees card to attempt to register a new employee from our front end. So let's go ahead and open up the manage employees page here. Then let's go ahead and come inside above the return statement. The first thing that we need to go ahead and do is grab in the employees in our authentication service from our global context. So let's go ahead and say const object with employees in authentication service is equal to use global context as global context type. Let's go ahead and import our use global context. We'll also go ahead and import our global context type. That's good to go. Now let's go ahead and come into our return statement inside the div. We could probably get rid of the manage employees at this point. Let's go ahead and get rid of that. And then inside here, let's go ahead and make a check for if authentication service.creating employees equal to true. Then if this is the case, let's go ahead and show the create employee form. Let's go ahead and import our create employee form here. That way it's not mad at us. And then let's come outside of this check for the creating employee. Then let's also go ahead and include an employees card. Let's go and import our employees card here. We need to go ahead and include a few props. First, we want to go ahead and set the header equal to manage employees. We're going to set the employees equal to employees from our global context. And finally, we want to go ahead and set display edit employees equal to true. That should go ahead and clear up our employees card and take away all of the errors that we have. It says inside the employees card still have an error because we're not using employees yet. We'll deal with that a little bit later on whenever we get more stuff done inside of it. But that should be good enough to at least allow us to hop into the web browser and take a look at what the form looks like and try to actually register a user. We'll be able to open up the network tab just to see that the request goes through. We aren't going to be able to actually see whenever we create the user on the web page yet. We'll go ahead and work on that in a second. So let's go and hop into the web browser. Log into the admin and just try to go ahead and create an employee real quick. So here in our company portal, let's go ahead and inspect that. We can go ahead and see the network tab. Unfortunately, my computer restarted. So now we're kind of back to square one with our base default employees. But that should be fine. We just don't have the second employee right now. Let's go ahead and say admin employee at company.com, .com, and then go ahead and put in pass and hopefully it lets us in. There we go. It was a little bit slow, but we got through. Now you can see we have this add employee button here. If we click this, it should go ahead and open up a form here, a modal, and this looks good. If we click on this, it should close out of it. Open it up again, looks good. Let's go ahead and say second and then employee. Here, employee contact will be 444, 444, and then 1234. So being an employee, that's fine. Here we go ahead and have a manager, employee, and then at company.com. And then finally, hourly is fine. And let's say they make $27 an hour. So the main thing here is once we get done below here, we're going to have a table. It's all the employees that we want to go ahead and manage. So we're not going to be able to see it now, but at least we want to go ahead and see in the network tab that whenever we click create employee, we're going to go ahead and hopefully, fingers crossed, that all the authentication is working. We'll get a 200. We'll also go ahead and get the employee back. And then we should be able to see the employees log in. So let's go ahead and click on this. Cool, it went through, everything's looking good. So here, it looks like maybe we want to go ahead and remove this. I'm not sure if we just missed this somewhere. I might want to go ahead and look into this in between here and just fix that up. But then you can go ahead and see that we have our second employee at company.com. We have the temporary password, and then it says, please share this with the new hire. So that's looking good. Let me go ahead and take a look at this create new employee. I don't believe that's supposed to be there. I think that's only supposed to show if we're actually in the creating of it. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. And then we'll go ahead and wrap up this section and then get into actually displaying all the employees that we have currently at our company. So I think the reason that's saying create new employee is because, no, it's not because of that button text, never mind. So I believe I did originally have this create new employee here. I'm wondering if just for continuity, we want to go ahead and remove this or move this down inside of the form. And the reason I'm thinking this is just because it doesn't really make sense to say create new employee whenever we already have created the employee, but maybe it does, I'm not sure. It just looks a little bit out of place. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and move this into where we are actually creating the employee. So we come down here and then just above this div with space between, I think we go ahead and put it there. If we go ahead and save and open this up again, now it just says new employee email and temporary password. Again, that's not exactly what I planned, but I'm just going to go ahead and make a small change because I think it looks a bit nicer. But now what we'd want to go ahead and do is basically just copy and paste this login that we can have access to it. So let me go ahead and copy this. So the email is secondemployee@company.com. And I'm going to go ahead and paste it on the side here so we can use it in a second. And then the password is this 521AA021. Paste that in. We can go ahead and close out of this. And if we go back to the login page here, and we can go ahead and I'm going to paste in the second employee at company.com as the email. Go ahead and turn in the password as well. Go ahead and log in. And now you can see we are inside of the second employee. So looks good. I'm going to go ahead and quote unquote log out. Eventually we'll go ahead and make it so we can actually log out, but it is what it is. And that'll go ahead and do it for this section. Let's go and wrap it up here, hop back into the code, and we'll get working on our next section. Now that we have successfully created a new employee as an admin, now we should set up the ability to actually view all the employees that work for the company. To do this, we want to go ahead and set up a table component that we can customize, but also have a similar look and feel across the entire application. To do this, let's go ahead and open up our Explorer. Let's go ahead and come into our components and make a new directory. We're going to go ahead and call this table. Then inside of here, it's going to make a new file. We'll call this table.tsx. We'll also go ahead and make a new file. Call this table.css. For the time being, we're going to go ahead and start a very simple table. We're going to build a bunch of components to put inside of it and kind of render the table as a bunch of children inside of our base table. So we can also go ahead and close out of our create employee form stuff. That is probably fine. I don't think that we need our employees card, which we might actually. So I'm not going to close out of that yet. So let's just keep this open. Let's go ahead and start out by saying import./table.css. Then let's go ahead and set up some props for the table. So let's go ahead and say interface table props. Inside of our table props, we're just going to go ahead and have children, which is a react.react node. With our prop interface setup, let's go ahead and come down here and say export const table is a react.fc arrow function. To set up our props, let's come back here behind the react.fc and then put in the table props inside of angle brackets. And inside of our parameters here, let's go ahead and pass in an object with children. Now that we have our function set up and our prop set up, let's go ahead and come into the function and set up our return statement. Inside the return statement, let's go ahead and return a table with a class name of employee management table. And inside of our table, let's go ahead and render those children. Like I mentioned before, the table is going to be very simple, but what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make a bunch of customizable components to render inside the table to make the tables look similar, but also be customizable. So to do that, let's go ahead and open up our Explorer once again. Let's go into our table folder. Let's go make a new file. We'll go ahead and call this table header, and we'll go ahead and say .tsx. Let's go and open this up, and then inside table header, the first thing we want to go ahead and do is import our table.css. Below, we need to go ahead and set up some props. Let's go ahead and say interface table header props. And inside we need a columns property, which is going to be an array of objects with an ID of string and a title of string. That looks good. Let's come down below and let's go ahead and say export const table header is a react.fc arrow function. Once again, let's go and set up our props by including the table header props inside of angle brackets after our react.fc. And inside the function parameter, let's go ahead and include columns inside of an object to break those apart and make the props easier to work with. Let's go and open up our function and set up our return statement really quick. Inside the return, let's go ahead and render a t head with the class name of employee management table header. Inside the t head, we want a tr element, and inside the tr, let's go ahead and say columns.map through each header. Let's open up this map and let's go ahead and set up a return statement. Inside the return, let's go ahead and return a th element with a class name of employee management table th. We want to go ahead and set the scope to call, and we'll set the key to header.id. Let's go ahead and close out this th, and then inside the th, let's go ahead and render header.title. That looks good. Now we need to go ahead and start setting up the individual rows that we want to go ahead and render inside the table. Let's go ahead and open up our Explorer once again, make a new file. This is going to go be a table row.tsx. Let's go and open up table row. Once again, let's go and import our table.css. Below, let's go and say interface table row props. Then inside of our table row props, we're going to start with an optional key, which is a number or string. We'll go ahead and have an ID, which is of type string. We'll have hover of type boolean. We'll have an optional handle click, which is going to be a function that takes in an react.mouse event on an HTML table row element and returns a void. And finally, we're going to have children, which is a react.react node. With our props interface set up, let's go ahead and say export const table row is a react.fc arrow function. Once again, let's go and set the props by putting in the table row props inside of angle brackets after react.fc. And inside of the function parameters, let's go ahead and include key, ID, hover, handle clicked, and children inside of an object to go and break those apart. Let's go and open up our function here and let's set up the return statement. And inside the return statement, let's go and return a tr for the time being. And that should go ahead and make the compiler happy for the most part, other than not using the props. We'll fix that in a second. So now the compiler's happy, let's go ahead and start working on the logic. So the first piece of logic that we need to go and set up is to say a const row clicked is equal to an arrow function. Let's come inside of the parameters and we're going to say that this takes in an event, which is a react.mouse event on an HTML table row element. Let's go and open up our function here. The first thing that we want to go ahead and do inside the function is check to see if the developer passed in a handle click function. If they did, let's go ahead and call that handle click with E. And that should basically handle our row clicked. It'll also go ahead and get the compiler off our back about the handle clicked. And that should basically be everything we need for our logic. It's pretty simple. Let's come back into this return and let's just clean this up a little bit. We want to come inside of the tr. We want to go ahead and set class name equal to some curly braces. We're going to check to see if hover is true. If it is, we're going to go ahead and set the class name to employee management table row. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and set it to an empty string. We're also going to go ahead and set the ID equal to ID. We're going to set the key equal to key. We're going to set on click equal to row clicked. And then finally, inside of the tr, let's go ahead and render the children that we passed in as props. And that should go ahead and do it for our table row. And that's also going to go ahead and do it for all the different components that we need to make up our employee tables that we're going to use throughout the application. So now let's go ahead and just go through and style all the components we set up here. To that, let's go and hop into the table.css. Let's first start out with our .employee management table class. Inside, we're going to go and set width equal to 100%. Font size will be 1 rem. Font weight will be 600 by default. Let's text align to the left. We want to set border collapse to collapse. Next, let's go ahead and select the employee management table TDs, as well as the employee management table THs. Inside, let's go ahead and set a border of 1 pixel solid and then the border color. And we'll also go ahead and set padding to 0.5 rem. Next, let's go ahead and select the employee management table TR, and we're going to go ahead and select the odd children. For every odd table row, we're going to go ahead and set the background color to var foreground. Next, we also want to go ahead and select the employee management table TR for the even children. And then for every even table row, we're going to go and set the background color to £E7, E7, E7. That looks good. Now let's go ahead and set up a employee management table row, hover. Here we're going to go ahead and set up cursor pointer. And we're going to go ahead and override the default background color by saying background color is $DDD and then bang important. Let's come below. Next, we're going to go ahead and select our employee management table header. Inside, let's go ahead and set the text transform to uppercase. Specifically for the header, we're going to set the font weight to 800. We're going to set the font weight to 1.25 rem. And we're going to set a padding to 0.75 rem, 0. Finally, we need to set up some styles for an ID of employee management table expanded row. This is going to be something that kind of comes up a little bit later on, but let's go and say pound employee management table expanded row. Inside, let's go ahead and say height is fit content, and our background color will be transparent. That's going to go ahead and do it for all of our table components. Now we can go ahead and put these to use and actually display our employees inside of our Manage Employees page. Like I mentioned, now that we have all of our components that we need to assemble the table that displays all the employees, let's get started developing it. So let's go ahead and open up our Project Explorer. Let's go ahead and make a new directory inside components. We're going to go ahead and call this employee and table. Let's go ahead and open this up, make a new file. Go ahead and call this employee table.tsx. I don't believe this was going to take any CSS for the time being, so we'll go ahead and keep it as is. Let's go ahead and get rid of some of our table stuff that we don't necessarily need for the time being, and we'll go ahead and continue. So the first thing that we need to go ahead and do is set up some state to describe the columns that our employees table is going to have. So first we're going to go ahead and start out by declaring a const manager employee table properties is equal to an empty array. Let's go ahead and open this up because we're going to go ahead and add in some of those objects that we set up to be props inside of our table header rows. So first we're going to have an object with ID of ID and title of ID. Next, we're going to have an object with ID of employee type and title of type. Then we'll have an object with ID of first name and title of first name. Next, an object with ID last name and title of last name. We'll have another object with ID email and title email. And finally, we'll have another object with ID reports to and title manager. So this object or this array is basically going to go ahead and define what rows / properties, or I guess I should say columns / properties, the manager type employee is going to be able to see on the employee table in the reports page. Next, let's come in below and let's go ahead and declare a const admin employee table properties is equal to an empty array. Let's go ahead and open up this array a little bit just to make some space. First, we're going to say ... manager employee table properties. So the admin will be able to see all the same properties as the manager, but they're also going to go and see an option to edit the employee. So let's go ahead and include another object with ID edit and title of edit. That'll go ahead and do it for our different table header properties. So next, let's go and say interface employee table props. Inside of our props, we want to go ahead and have a property called employees, which is an employee array. Let's go ahead and import our employees so it's not mad at us. And then we also want to go ahead and have a display edit employee, which is a Boolean. That's good for our props. Let's go and say export const employee table is a react.fc equal to an arrow function. Let's go and set up our props by coming back behind our react.fc and include our employee table props inside of angle brackets. Then inside of our function parameters, let's go and include an object with employees and display edit employee to gain easier access to our props. Let's go and open up our function here. Let's go ahead and set up our return statement. Inside the return, let's go and render a table component. Let's make sure we go ahead and import our table from our components here. And then this is also going to go ahead and need a children. So let's go ahead and also render a t-body inside of our table. And now that should at least be happy enough to allow us to work in here without the compiler complaining. So now let's go ahead and set up a couple pieces of state here to set everything up that we need. So first, let's go ahead and say const editing employee, set editing employees equal to use state of type number equal to 0. Let's go ahead and import our use state so this doesn't matter to us. Looks good. Let's come below. Now we need another piece of state to go ahead and check to see what the expanded employee is, which is whenever we say expanded employee, it's basically just going to be showing some more information about them. So let's go ahead and say const expanded employee and set expanded employee is equal to use state of type string and set that to an empty string. Next, we need to go ahead and determine what columns we're going to display inside of the table. Let's go ahead and say const column props is equal to display edit employee question mark. If display edit employee is true, then we want to go ahead and render the admin employee table properties. Otherwise, we'll have our colon and we'll go ahead and have the manager employee table properties. Now we have what columns we're going to go and render. Let's go ahead and set up some logic. Let's start out by saying const edit employee clicked is equal to an arrow function. Let's come inside the parameters. This is going to take in an event, which is a react.mouse event on an HTML button element. Let's go and open up our function here. And we want to go ahead and say e.stopPropagation so no funky stuff starts happening here. If we click on an employee to edit it, then that means that we no longer want to go ahead and see the expanded information. So let's go ahead and call set expanded employee with an empty string. Next, we need to go ahead and determine the ID, or basically turn it into a number because it's going to start as a string. Let's go ahead and say const ID is equal to plus e.currentTarget.id. Then let's go ahead and say if editing employee is equal to ID. If this is the case, then we already have the employee open. We're already editing them. So that means we just want to go ahead and close it. So let's go ahead and say set editing employee equal to 0. Otherwise, let's set up an else statement. Otherwise, if we're not already editing an employee, let's go ahead and say set editing employee to the ID that we just selected. That looks good. Let's come below here. And then we also want to go ahead and set up a const expand employee clicked function. Let's come inside the parameters. Once again, this is going to take in an event, which is a react.mouse event on an HTML table row element. Once again, let's go and open up the function here and say e.stop_propagation so that it doesn't do any funky stuff. Then we want to go ahead and check to see if we're already editing an employee. So then if we click off of editing, then we don't want to be editing anymore. So let's go and say set editing employee to 0. Then we want to go and say const email is equal to e.currentTarget.id. Once we have our email, we want to go ahead and check if email is equal to expanded employee. If this is the case, then we already have an expanded employee, or the expanded employee is the same one that we clicked on. So then we want to go ahead and close out of it. So let's go ahead and call set expanded employee with an empty string. Otherwise, let's set up our else statement. Here we don't have the employee that we clicked on expanded. So let's go ahead and call set expanded employee to the email that we got. That looks good. Now we can go ahead and open up the table to be able to view an expanded view for editing an employee. And we can also go ahead and open up an expanded view to go ahead and view some employee information as well. Now that's good to go. Let's come back into our table. I'm going to try to be really careful here because there could be some mess ups or some slip ups just because the logic here, not logic, but the structure gets a little bit complicated. To start out, we're going to go ahead and render a table column here with columns equal to column props. Let's go and import our table header. So now this is basically going to go ahead and render one column for each one of these props, whether it's the manager or the admin. The admin has all of the manager, but it also allows you to edit. So that looks good. Now we can go ahead and come into our table body here. Then inside of our table body, let's go and set up a employees.map to each employee. Let's go and open this up and set up a return statement. Inside the return statement, we're going to go say react.fragment with a key equal to employee.email. Now, if you've never seen this syntax before, you have to use the full fragment syntax to be able to use keys in here. You can't just use the short term, so that's why we're doing it this way. And we need the key in here, otherwise it's going to yell at us inside the console saying that we don't have a key for this map. So that's why we're doing it that way. Then inside this fragment, let's go ahead and set up a table row with an ID equal to employee.email. We're going to go and set the handle clicked equal to expand employee clicked and hover equal to true. Let's go and import our table row. That way it's not mad at us anymore. Let's go and open this up. Inside the table row, let's go ahead and render a th with scope of call. And inside of our th, let's go ahead and render employee.id. Then we'll go ahead and come below this th, and we're going to go ahead and say call props.slice 16. And then we're going to go ahead and call .map. And we're going to go ahead and say prop is an ID of string and title of string. Inside of our map function, let's go ahead and first say const value is equal to type of employee. Then we're going to have a set of square brackets with prop.id as key of employee. We're going to go ahead and check to see if this is equal to an object. If it is, it's going to be employee.reports to .ID. Otherwise, we'll set NA. Then we're going to have a colon, employee, square brackets, prop.id as key of employee. Next, we're going to go ahead and say const data is of type string, number, or boolean. And this is going to be equal to type of value equal to object. We're going to say question mark employee that reports to question mark.id or NA. Then we're going to say colon value. Now the reason for this gross logic here is because since we technically are storing employees because we have like reports to there, we need to kind of convert it into a string, a number, or a boolean. And this is more or less the way that I came about doing this. It's really ugly and it has a lot of TypeScript weird finagling, but bear with me here. That's all it's doing. It's just go ahead and make sure that whenever we go ahead and put these into our table here to display them, it's going to go ahead and work and not be some weird stuff. Because the issue here is that sometimes for like a manager, they don't have a reports to, so then it's null or undefined or something weird. It breaks. We don't want that to break. This just works. So trust me here. So now that we have this data all set up, let's go and set up our return statement. Inside the return statement, we'll go ahead and have a TD with a key of prop.id. Inside the TD, let's go ahead and render the data. Now this is where it gets important to do this properly. We want to come outside of the curly braces for our columns.map. Let's see here. We want to be inside of employees, but we want to be outside of our columns.map. Let's come right here. Then we want to go ahead and check to see if display edit employees equal to true. If it is, let's go ahead and display a TD. And inside the TD, let's go ahead and render a button with type transparent. We're going to set ID to curly braces and then backtick $sign curly brace employee.id. The reason we have to do it like this is because IDs have to be a string, but our employee ID is a number. There's probably another way to convert this, but I'm just going to go ahead and throw it into a string. That should be fine. And then finally, handle click is going to be equal to edit employee clicked. Let's go ahead and import our button here. Looks good. Let's go and open up our button. Inside here, we're going to have a set of curly braces with editing employee equal to employee.id question mark. We're going to have some fragments, colon fragments. Now let's go and clean these fragments up a little bit. So here, go and bring this down here a little bit and down here. So if we are editing the employee, we're going to have a font awesome icon. Let's go and get rid of these fragments. Let's go ahead and say font awesome icon. Let's go and import that. And the icon is going to be FAX. We're going to set the size to large. We're going to set the color to black. And then let's go ahead and import our FAX. There we go. And I guess we didn't get font awesome. I thought we did that. I don't know why this is mad. I guess it didn't import it properly or something. I'm not sure what's going on there, but it's fine. Let's go and delete this fragment, and then let's go ahead and render another font awesome icon here. And then we're going to say icon is equal to FA pin. Size will be large again, and color will be equal to black. Let's go ahead and import our FA pin. Looks good. Next, we want to come out of the table row that we are working on. And then we want to go ahead and say editing employee is equal to employee.id and. If this is the case, let's go ahead and do this. And let's go ahead and render another table row with an ID equal to employee management table expanded row. And here we're going to go ahead and set hover to false. Inside, let's go ahead and have a TD with a col span equal to 7. And inside the TD, let's go and have a div with a class name of row. We're going to have a style with an object with align items equal to stretch. Let's open up this div. Here, we're going to have a fragment with update employee personal information. And then we're going to have another placeholder fragment with update employee pay information. Now let's come out of here and let's go ahead and add a check for expanded employee is equal to employee.email. If this is the case, let's go ahead and have another table row with an ID of employee management table expanded row. And we'll set hover equal to false again. Inside, we'll once again have a TD with a col span equal to 7. And inside of our TD, we'll have a div with class name row. And then style with an object that has the property align items as stretch. Inside, let's go ahead and set up a placeholder fragment that says display employee contact information. Then we're going to go ahead and set up a check for display edit employee. If this is true, let's go ahead and have another placeholder fragment that says display employee pay information. Looks good. That basically sets up our entire employee table component for the time being. Obviously, we're going to come back through and set these up a little bit later on. But now what we need to go ahead and do is we want to add our employee table to our employees card component and then make sure everything seems to be rendering properly before coming through and creating those components to replace those placeholder fragments that I mentioned before. So that being said, let's go and hop into the employees card component and make use of our employee table. So back inside of our employees card, let's go ahead and come below where we have our display edit employee. Then let's go ahead and render an employee table. Let's go and import our employee table. That way we can actually use it. Inside the employee table, we're going to go and set employees equal to employees. And we're going to go and set display edit employee equal to display edit employee. We can go and save. That looks good. Now that should go ahead and do it for all the changes we need in the employees card component as well. So now let's go ahead and hop back into the manage employees page and set it to fetch all the employees to be displayed in the employee table so that we can see it on the front end. So now back inside of the manage employees page, we need to update the use global context structure to actually include the employee service. So let's come in after the authentication service and let's go and include the employee service. Now that we have access to the employee service, let's come down here. We want to go ahead and set up a use effect. Let's go and import our use effect really quick from React. This isn't going to need any dependencies because we're going to do it once. And as soon as the application loads up this page, let's go ahead and call the employee service.fetch all employees function. Let's go ahead and give that a save. And that should, in theory, load up all the employees. So now let's go ahead and hop into the front end. Make sure whenever we log into the admin account and load up that managed employees page, we should be able to see that table there with all the employees, excluding ourselves, because obviously we don't want to be able to update information about ourselves. To make sure all the information gets populated properly and we can start working on kind of filling out the table a little bit more and getting everything done. So let's hop into the browser here and see what it looks like. Once again, the browser, let's go and log in as admin employee at company.com and then go ahead and pass in a pass. Go and log in. Now you can see we did mess something up here. We need to go back through and make sure that this gets stacked properly, but we can see our table. Before we go ahead and look and click it on stuff, let's go ahead and make sure that we put this table in the right spot. Obviously, I didn't put in the right spot if it's side by side. So back inside of our employees card here, let's just see here. So I think that we want to go ahead and space this. Let's copy this outside the space between. Let's actually put it right here. Save that and hop back into the browser really quick. That looks a lot better. So now we have our top space for creating employees. We can see our manager. If we open this up, you can see display employee contact information, display pay information. We go and click on begin, it closes it. If we click on this one, clicks on this, so on and so forth. Click on this, you can see update and update. Go ahead and close out of that. That is looking good. So everything is working. We're ready to move on. We need to go ahead and go through and basically set up these different display and updates. That way we can actually do all of that before wrapping up the episode. As we saw in the demo of the employee table working, we have several placeholder components that we need to fill up before we call the admin functionality done. The first of these that I would like to work on is the employee contact information component, which displays information such as the employee's home address and phone number. To create this, let's go and open up our project directory here, and let's go ahead into our components, make a new directory. Let's go ahead and call this employee contact information. Let's go ahead and make a new file in here. Let's go and call this employee contact information.tsx. Let's go ahead and make a new file again. Call this employee contact information.css. Hopefully I spelled that all properly. Let's go and close out of here. We'll still need our table. I don't believe we'll need our card, but we'll keep it anyway. And obviously we'll probably want our manage employees table, since that's the main thing we're working on. To start out, let's go and import our /employee contact information.css. Next up, let's go and say interface employee contact information props. Inside, we're going to go ahead and have an email of type string. We're going to have a contact info of type contact information. Let's go and import our contact information really quickly here. Looks good. And finally, we're going to have an optional display header of type boolean. Looks good. For our props, let's go ahead and say export const employee contact information is a react.fc equal to an arrow function. Let's go ahead and set up our props by coming back here behind the react.fc and including our employee contact information props inside of our angled brackets. Then inside of our function parameters, let's go and pass an object with email, contact info, and display header equal to true to break apart those props and make it easier to use. Let's go and open up our function, and let's set up a return statement here. Inside of return, let's go and return a div, and that should make our compiler happy enough to start working on the state and the logic. Now I want to go ahead and basically just break apart our contact information to make it easier to access. So let's go and say const object with phone number, address line 1, address line 2, state, city, and zip code equal to contact info. Then let's come below. And let's go ahead and say const employee contact map is equal to a new array. So inside of this employee contact map, we're going to have different objects with 3 different properties. The first one's going to be title. So this is going to be like if it's their email, their phone number, so on and so forth. The content is going to be what we display in there. And then it's kind of an icon that just kind of displays a nice little image beside. So here inside of our first one, we're going to go ahead and have the title be email. We're going to go ahead and have the content be email. And we're going to have the icon be FA envelope. Okay. Let's go ahead and import our FA envelope. Let's go and set up another object. This one's going to have a title of phone number, a content of phone number, and an icon of FA phone. Let's go and import the FA phone. Let's set up our next object, which is going to have a title of address line 1, content of address line 1, an icon of FA road. Let's go and import our FA road here. Let's set up our next object, which will have a title of address line 2, content of address line 2, an icon of FA house. Go and bring in our FA house here. So if we go ahead and do like that, there we go. I have another object here. This one will have a title of state, content of state, and icon of FA landmark. Let's go and bring in our FA landmark. Let's set up another object. This one's going to have a title of city, content of city, and icon of FA tree city. Let's go and bring that in. And finally, let's go and set up one more object. This one's going to have a title of zip code, content of zip code, and icon of FA route. Let's go and import our FA route. That's all the different content that we're going to go ahead and render inside of our components. Now let's go ahead and come down into our return here, and let's go ahead and check to see if display headers equal to true. So if that's the case, let's go ahead and have an H4 with employee contact information. Let's come below this check for display header, and let's go ahead and render a div with a class name of employee contact info. Then inside this div, let's go ahead and say employee contact map.map through each prop. Inside the map, let's go ahead and return a div with a key equal to props.title, and we'll set the class name equal to with have. Let's go ahead and close out this div. It doesn't like to automatically close whenever you have it like this. Then we'll have an H6. Inside the H6, we're going to go ahead and say props.title, space, and then we're going to have some curly braces with an empty string. Below, we're going to go ahead and have a font awesome icon. Let's go and import our font awesome icon here. Whoops, there we go. An icon is going to be equal to props.icon. We're going to follow this with a space colon, come down below, and then we're going to have a p tag with props.content. So that looks pretty good. I think that's all we need to do. The most of the work was just kind of setting up the map to be able to actually render all that. But other than that, it looks good. So now let's go and hop into the CSS and make it look pretty before we put it into our card. So first, let's go ahead and select our employee contact info class. Inside, let's go ahead and say width is 100%. Next, let's go ahead and say display is equal to flex. Let's set flex wrap to wrap, and row gap is going to be 0.75 rem. So now it's going to go ahead and do it for all of our employee contact information. Now, what we're also going to go ahead and do next is we need to put this inside of an information card to make it look pretty and make it look like the rest of the cards on the page. If we want to, we could have just done this all inside of the employee table, but I'll make a new component. So let's go ahead and start working on that before we go ahead and add this into the employee table and see it all working. As I mentioned, we need to go ahead and wrap up our contact information component into our information card component to make it have a consistent look with the other pieces of information that we're going to be displaying across the information. Let's go ahead and open up our project again. Let's go and go into here and make a new directory. Let's go ahead and call this contact information card. Let's go and make a new file. Make this a contact information card.tsx. Like so. Let's go and open this up, close out of this. Here, let's go ahead and just set up an interface with contact information card props. Inside, we're just going to go ahead and pass an employee of type employee. Let's go and import our employee type here from our types file. We can come below and let's go ahead and say export const. Contact information card is a react.fc equal to an error function. Let's go ahead and come behind our react.fc. Let's go ahead and include our square brackets with contact information card props to include the props. Then inside of our function parameter, let's go ahead and pass in an object with employee to break that apart. Let's go and open up our function here and set up our return statement. Inside the return, let's go ahead and render an information card. Let's go and import our information card so it's not mad at us. Let's open it up. And then inside, let's go ahead and return a div with a class name of column. Inside our column, we're going to go ahead and have an h5 with contact information colon. Below our h5, let's go ahead and render our employee contact information component. Let's go and import this, maybe. Let's import it. There we go. We're going to say email is equal to employee.email. Contact info will be equal to employee.contact information. And display header will equal to false. And that's good to go. Like I mentioned, this is a very simple component. This is definitely something we could have just slapped into the employee table as is, but I kind of wanted to at least make it somewhat reasonable. So that being said, let's go and hop back into the employee table. Let's go ahead and we want to find where we have the display employee contact information. Let's go and delete this. And now let's go ahead and render a contact information card with employee equal to employee. Let's go and import our contact information card and maybe there we go, and save that, and that should be good to go. Now we should be able to go ahead and hop into our front end here, take a look, make sure the contact information is being all set up properly, and it looks good. We're actually going ahead and continuing onto the next part of this phase. So here, let's go and just give this a refresh really quick, and we might have to re-log in since I refreshed. Let's go ahead and log into admin, employee, at company.com. Let's go ahead and put in pass and log in. So now if we go ahead and click on this to expand it, you can see our contact information. Right now, it's kind of expanding a little bit farther than we want because we don't have the pay information, which is what we're probably going to work on next. Then once we kind of get that in there, it's going to split down the middle, look a lot nicer. We can close out of this, click on employee 1, and then second employee doesn't have any information. They just have an email and a phone number, so it doesn't fill out. So you can kind of see here that we have our title, we have the icon, and we have the content, how we had it all set up there. So that looks all good and dandy. Let's go ahead and hop back into the code and continue working on the next step of this chapter. Next up, we need to set up the ability to view the employee's pay information. But before we do that, I want to set up a convenient way to format money. So let's go ahead and open up our project directory here. We want to come into our services. We're going to make a new file. I'm going to go ahead and call this use format $.ts. We're going to go ahead and create a hook to actually format dollars to look nicer for us. Let's also go ahead and close out of this contact information card and the employee contact information. We do not need that at the moment. First up, we want to go ahead and set up a new type that we're going to use inside of the formatter. So let's go ahead and say type style is equal to currency or unit or decimal or percent. Now we have our style. Let's go ahead and say export default function use format dollars. Let's come inside of our parameters here. We want to go ahead and pass in language, which is a type string, style, which is of type style, and currency of type string. Let's go and open up our function here. And then first we want to go ahead and say const format dollars is equal to intl.number format. Inside this function call, let's first go ahead and pass in language. Then we need to go ahead and pass in an object. Inside the object, style will be equal to style, and currency will be currency. Now that we have our formatter, let's come below and we're going to go ahead and say const format is equal to an arrow function that returns a string. Then inside of our parameter, we want to go ahead and pass in the amount, which is a number. Let's go and open up our function here. Inside the function, we want to go ahead and return backticks $ curly brace. And inside, we're going to go ahead and say format $.format amount. Let's come out of our format function and we want to go ahead and return an object with format inside of it. Now we have this reusable hook that we can use throughout the code to actually go ahead and format our currency in a very simple way. Now we can go ahead and use this use format $hook inside the next component that will go ahead and display our pay information. To display the employee's pay information, let's go ahead and create a new component. So to do that, let's go and open up our directory here. Inside of components, let's make a new directory. We're going to go ahead and call this pay information card. Let's go ahead and make a new file. This is going to be pay information card.tsx. This one's not going to have CSS, at least not for now. We can also go ahead and close out use format $. We don't need that open for the time being. Now, since we're not going to import any CSS, let's just go ahead and start with the props. Let's go ahead and say interface pay information card props. Inside, let's go ahead and include a pay info property, which is a pay information type. Let's also go ahead and import our pay information here. Then we also want to include a location of type string. With our prop setup, let's go ahead and say export const pay information card is a react.fc equal to an arrow function. Let's go ahead and set up the props by coming behind a react.fc, including a set of angle brackets with pay information card props. Then let's come inside of our function parameters here and include an object with pay info and location. Inside of our function, let's go ahead and set up our return statement. And let's go ahead and return an information card. Let's go and import information card here. Looks good. And then let's come inside. Since this needs a child, let's go ahead and return a div with a class name of row. There we go. Now that the linter is happy, let's come up above and start setting up our state and logic. To start out, let's go ahead and say const format is equal to use format $. Let's come inside the function call. And first, let's make sure we import our use format $. And inside, we're going to go ahead and pass in en-us as a string, currency as a string, and USD as a string. So here we're saying the locale is English US. We're going to go ahead and format it with currency, and we want to go ahead and format it with US dollars. So looks good. Next, let's come below and create a function that can basically calculate the yearly pay for the employee. Let's go ahead and say const estimate yearly pay is equal to an arrow function that returns a string. Let's come inside the parameter. We want to go ahead and pass in pay info of type pay information. Let's go and open up our function here. And inside the function, let's first add a check for if payinfo.payType is equal to salary. If this is the case, obviously we can just go ahead and return the amount that they get paid for the year's salary. So let's go ahead and return backticks $ curly braces. And then we're going to go ahead and return format and then payinfo.payAmount. Otherwise, they're going to be hourly, so let's set up an else statement. Inside the else, let's go ahead and return backticks $ curly brace as well. Inside the backtick curly brace, we're going to go ahead and say format. And inside our format function, we're going to go ahead and pass payinfo.payAmount times 40 times 52. The reason we're going to go ahead and use this for our estimate for yearly pay is because you work approximately 40 hours a week for full time, and there's 52 working weeks inside of a year. So looks good. So now we can go ahead and come back inside of our information card. And what we want to go ahead and do is we want to come inside of the div that says row. And let's go ahead and make another div with a class name of column. We're going to go ahead and set a style with an object with width, location equal to employees. If this is the case, it'll be 50%. Otherwise, it'll be 33%. Inside this div, let's go ahead and have an h4 with employee pay information. Below this div, let's include another div. Inside here, we're going to have an h6 with pay type, and then we'll have a p tag with payinfo.payType. Let's come outside this div and have another div. Inside this div, we'll have an h6 with the pay amount, and then we're going to go ahead and say p with format of payinfo.payAmount. And then finally, let's go ahead and set up one last div here. Inside this div, we'll go ahead and have an h6 with estimated yearly pay, and below we'll have a p tag with estimate yearly pay and then pass in the pay info from our props. That should go ahead and do it for the time being. We're going to go ahead and come back a little bit later on and add some more stuff in here once we start getting some pay stubs and other stuff like that set up. But that's going to go ahead and do it for now. So let's go ahead and hop back into the employee table to actually display this. So now instead of having this fragment here that says display employee information, if this is set to true, let's go ahead and remove this here. And let's go ahead and actually render the pay information card. Let's go and import that. Let's set the pay info equal to employee.payInformation. And here, location is going to be equal to employees. Now, in theory, we should be able to go ahead and hop onto the front end and click on it and actually see an employee's pay information. So let's go and hop into our web browser here. And now you can go ahead and see we have our employee pay information. We have the pay type hourly. Pay amount is $25. An estimated yearly pay is $52,000, which is pretty close. We come into the second employee here. We can see that they make 27. So they make about 56.1. So that's looking pretty good. And that is all good to go for this part. So now obviously what we need to go ahead and start working on next is being able to update personal and pay information. So let's go ahead and hop into the front end and start getting to work on getting all of that set up. First up, to be able to edit the employee's personal information, we need to go ahead and create a new type to be able to send all of the data back to the backend to actually be able to perform that update. So to do this, let's go and navigate to our types file here, and let's go ahead and come down here where we have our interface for a new employee login. And let's go ahead and declare an interface and export it called edit employee payload. Inside of here, we're going to have an email of type string. We're going to have a first name of type string or null. We're going to have a last name of type string or null. We're going to have a type of employee type, and we're going to have a reports to, which is equal to string or null. So that should be all we need to go ahead and update for this. Now we can go ahead and hop into our employee service to make it so we can actually edit an employee. Now that we have our payload type, we can finally come into the employee service and set up the API call to the backend to update the employee. So let's go ahead and hop into employee service here. It looks good. And the first thing that we're going to need to go ahead and do is update our employee service types. Let's come up here. First, let's go ahead and add an employee updating, which is a Boolean. Let's also go ahead and add an employee update error, which is a Boolean. And finally, let's go ahead and come down below our fetch all employees. And here, let's go ahead and create a submit update information, which is an arrow function that takes in a payload of edit employee payload and employees of type employee array and returns a void. Let's go ahead and ensure that we have imported our edit employee payload, and that's good to go. So now, first thing we need to go ahead and do is make sure that we have the update employee here. So after our update employees, let's also go ahead and include update employee as well. And then let's go ahead and come below and set up some of our local state. So first, let's go ahead and say const employee updating and set employee updating is equal to use state of type Boolean equal to false. Let's go and import our use state here so it's not mad at us. Let's come below. Then let's go ahead and say const employee update error and set employee update error is equal to use state of type Boolean and false again. That looks good. Next up, we need to go ahead and come below our fetch all employees. And we need to go ahead and set up a utility function that helps us replace an updated employee in our current list of employees. So to do this, let's go ahead and declare a function called insert updated employee, which returns an employee array. And then inside of our function parameters, let's go ahead and pass in employees, which is an employee array, and updated employee, which is an employee. Let's go ahead and open up our function here, and let's go ahead and say return employees.map. Inside our map function, let's go ahead and say employee arrow, employee.id is equal to updated employee.id. We'll say question mark updated employee colon employee. So basically we'll go ahead and replace the old employee with the updated employee. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead and return the old employee or the employee that wasn't updated, more or less is all we're doing there. Now we go ahead and go above our function here, and let's go ahead and say const submit update information is equal to an async arrow function. Let's come inside of our parameters here, and we want to go ahead and pass in a payload of type edit employee payload and employees of type employee array. Let's come inside of our function here. Let's set up a try block. We'll also go ahead and set up a catch e here real quick. Inside the catch, let's go ahead and say console.log e so that the compiler is not mad at us. And then below the console.log, we're also going to go ahead and call set employee update error to true. Now that we have our logic handled for error, let's go ahead and come into the try. Let's go ahead and start it by saying set employee update error to false. And we'll set employee updating to true. Then we can go and say const res is equal to request.put. We want to make the request to slash employee slash, and then we'll go ahead and pass the payload as the body. Now below, let's go ahead and call update employees. And then inside here, we're going to go ahead and call insert updated employee. And we'll go ahead and pass in our list of employees and res.data. Then if everything was successful, we still want to go ahead and set up a finally block. And we'll go ahead and set employee updating to false. That looks good. Now let's come down to where we have our return. And we need to go ahead and pass in these new properties. So let's go ahead and say employee updating. Let's also go ahead and pass in employee update error. Let's be sure to add the comma after fetch all employees. And then let's also go ahead and include submit update information. Earlier, also went ahead and got ahead of myself, so let's go ahead and remove the update employee. We don't need this until we get to individuals updating themselves, I don't think. So I got a little ahead of myself there. Let's go ahead and remove that. That way we don't have the red. And I think that looks pretty good. Now we go ahead and move along to actually using this to update the employees.
Now that we have everything we need set up, we can finally move forward with creating the form responsible for updating the employee's information. So let's go ahead and close out of a couple things here. We don't need the pay information. We don't need the employee service. We'll keep these open. I don't know if we need the employee card, but we'll keep it open anyway. Let's go and open up our Explorer, go into our components, make a new folder or a new directory. We're going to go ahead and call this update employee information form. And then let's go ahead and go into this directory, new file, we update employee information form.tsx. And we're not going to have a CSS for this one, so let's close off our Explorer. First thing that we need to go ahead and do is create an interface for our props. So let's go and say interface update employee information form props. Inside, we're going to have a single property, employee, which is of type employee. Let's go and import our employee. That way it's not going to be mad at us. And it's going to come from types. There we go. Looks good. Let's come down here. And let's go and say export const update employee information form, which is a react.fc equal to an arrow function. Let's come behind the react.fc. Let's go ahead and put our angle brackets with update employee information form props to set up our props. And then inside of our function parameter, let's go ahead and pass an object with employee to go ahead and make our props easy to use inside the component. Let's go and open up our function. And then inside, let's go and set up our return statement. And inside the return statement for the time being, let's just go ahead and return a fragment. That way the compiler's not mad at us. And then we can come up top and start working on our states and our different logic pieces here. The first thing we need to go ahead and do is we need to get access to our employees and our employee service from the global context. So let's go and say const object with employees and employee service is equal to use global context as global context type. Now to go ahead and import our use global context here. Let's also go ahead and import our global context type. It's gonna be mad at us for the time being because we're not using those, but we'll set it up in a second. Then we need to go ahead and say const initial edit employee is equal to an empty object. Inside, we're going to start with email is equal to employee.email. We're going to say first name is equal to an empty string. Last name will be equal to an empty string. Type will be employee.employee type. And we'll set reports to an empty string. So these are all the properties that the admin is going to be able to update on the employee. Technically, email is not going to be updatable. It's just going to update automatically on the back end if we change the first and last name. But the admin can change the first name, last name, the employee's type, and who they report to. So let's come below here and continue working here. Next up, let's go and set up our state. So let's go and say const edit employee and set edit employee is equal to use state of type edit employee payload and then pass in that initial edit employee. Let's go and import our use state here. And this should be good to go. Looks good. And I might have typoed edit employee payload. Oh no, this has come from somewhere else. I'm just silly. Let's go and import that from the types as well. Let's come down here and we also need to go ahead and deal with the changes. So let's go ahead and say const handle input change. That way we can keep track of what our edit employee is being set to. Let's come inside of the parameters. It's going to take in an event, which is a react.change event. And it's going to take in either an HTML input element or an HTML select element. Now we can go ahead and open up our function here. The first thing we want to go and do is say set edit employee to an object. Inside the object, let's go ahead and say dot edit employee. That way we can go ahead and keep the object the same at first, and then we'll go ahead and say square brackets e.target.name e.target.value to go ahead and change only that specific value with the type name inside of the employee object. Looks good. Let's go ahead and come below our handle input change function, and we also need a way to go ahead and handle submitting the form. So let's go ahead and say const handle submit update is equal to an arrow function. Let's come inside of the parameters. This is also going to take an event, which will be a react.mouse event on an HTML button element. Let's open up our function here. The first thing we want to go and do is call e.prevent default. That way the form doesn't do some funky stuff on us. Then we'll go ahead and say const payload is equal to an object. Inside the payload, we want to say email is employee.email. Then we want to say first name is edit employee.firstname is equal to an empty string. If that's the case, we're going to set to null. Otherwise, we're going to set to edit employee.firstname. Last name is going to be the same thing. So edit employee.lastname is equal to an empty string, question mark. If that's the case, we're going to set to null. Otherwise, we're going to set to edit employee.lastname. For the type, we're just going to go ahead and set to edit employee.type. Then we want to go ahead and set reports to equal to edit employee.reports to is equal to an empty string, question mark. If that's the case, we're going to set null. Otherwise, we're going to set edit employee.reports to. Now, the reason that we're setting these specifically to null is because on the back end, it's looking for if these are null, don't change them. Otherwise, if there's a string passed to them, change them. So if these stay an empty string, we pass an empty string there, it's going to see that the string was basically there, set to an empty string instead of not changing it. So that's the idea behind that. So let's come down below our payload here. Let's go ahead and call employee service.submit update information. Inside of our parameters, let's go and pass the payload and employees. And that should go ahead and be good for submitting the update. Now there's one final thing that we need to do before setting up the form HTML, and that's to make sure that whenever we close out of the form, the edit employee state is actually reset. So to do this, let's go ahead and first set up a simple use effect. Let's go ahead and open this up to make it look prettier, and then let's go ahead and import our use effect here. We're going to do the same trick we did in the other form, which is go ahead and use a callback function return to more or less act as a component did on mount. So let's go ahead and return an arrow function. Inside the arrow function, let's go and set the edit employee to initial edit employee to reset that state. Now that looks good to me. Now we can go and hop into a return. We're going to go and keep this fragment here, but inside the fragment, we're going to go ahead and add a check for employee service.employee updating question mark. And then let's go ahead and just render 2 fragments for the time being. Let's go and clean this up a little bit. That way it just looks a little bit nicer. So if it is loading, we'll do one thing. If it's not loading, we'll do something else. So if it is loading, let's go ahead and delete this fragment. And let's actually go ahead and render in a loading component. Let's go ahead and import our loading component. So if we are updating the employee, we'll show loading. Otherwise, we want to go ahead and show the form component. Make sure this comes from the correct place. And we can start working on this. We're going to need to open this up because we have some props to set up. So inside of our form component, let's go ahead and say button text is equal to update employee information. The error will be employee service.employee update error. The error message will be unable to update employee's information. The form action will be handle submit update. And finally, the width will be set to 50%. Now let's come down inside the form component. Let's go ahead and set up an H2 that says update employee information. Below our H2, let's go ahead and say div class name with space between. So let's go ahead and open up our space between div. We're going to have another div with the class name of width half. Inside our width half, let's go ahead and set up a form input. And let's go and make sure we input our form input. Or import it, and then open this up. That way we can set up our props. First, we're going to have type equal to text. Label will be equal to first name. Name will be first name. Placeholder will be employee.firstname. Content is going to be equal to edit employee.firstname or empty string. And finally, handle input is going to be equal to handle input change. Now let's come outside this form input and the width half div, and let's go ahead and set up another width half div. Inside, let's go and set up another form input. And let's open this up. Inside, we'll say type is equal to text. We'll go ahead and say label is equal to last name. Name will be equal to last name. Placeholder will equal to employee.lastname. Content is equal to edit employee.lastname or empty string. And handle input will be equal to handle input change. Looks good. Now let's come below our div that has the space between. And let's set up another div with the class name of space between. Let's open up this div. Inside, let's go and have a div with a class name of width half. And inside here, let's go ahead and set up a form select. Let's go and import our form select really quickly. And let's open this up to set up the props. Inside, let's go ahead and say label is equal to employee type. Name will be equal to type. Values is going to be equal to an array with employee string, manager string, and admin string. We will set the default value to employee.employee type. And finally, we'll set handle input to handle input change. Now let's come below our width half div. And let's go and set up another width half div. Inside here, let's go ahead and have a form input. And let's open up the form input. This is going to be type equal to text again. The label will equal to manager. Name is going to be equal to reports to. Placeholder is going to be equal to employee.reports to question mark.email or NA. Content is going to be equal to edit employee.reports to question mark and then edit employee.reports to or an empty string. And finally, our handle input is going to equal to handle input change. Go ahead and save this up. And now that should go ahead and do it for our form component. Now all we should need to do is navigate back to the employee table component and then find where we need to implement this and then find where we need to place this form to be able to actually update the employee. Let's go ahead and navigate back to the employee table. And then we already scrolled down. So we need to go ahead and go where this update and personal information is. Let's go ahead and delete this. And let's go ahead and import our update employee information form. Let's go and import this form from our form. And then let's go ahead and say employee is equal to employee. And now in theory, if we save this up, refresh and everything, we should be able to log into the admin and actually update an employee if we want to. Let's go ahead and test that out. Let's go and open up the web browser, try to log in as the admin employee, and then make sure we can update an employee's information. So I'll see you guys in the browser. Let's go ahead and hop back to the login page. Let's go and admin and employee at company.com and then PASS. My computer's been to sleep a couple times since I've recorded. If you guys don't know, I record this over several days just because it takes so long to edit and record each one. Let's go ahead and try to log in and it looks like we either messed something up. Admin employee at company.com, that looks proper. And PASS, I don't think I have caps lock on. Let me make sure I don't have cap locks on. No, I don't. What's going on here? I might need to restart the server really quick. Let me try to do that. Like I said, my computer has kind of been to sleep and some funky stuff can go on sometimes whenever IntelliJ stays open, whenever your computer turns on and off. Let's try to refresh again. And let's go ahead and try to add in, log in as admin employee at company.com, and then put in PASS, log in. There we go. Yeah, sometimes some funky stuff happens. And since we restarted, now we don't have that new employee. We wanted to add them in, we can. But my primary concern here is seeing if we click on this guy, we can see the update employee information. Now let's go ahead and say that this guy is actually going to be first and employee, like so. They're still going to be employee. So if we go ahead and click update, you can see now up here, it kind of flashed for a second. And that's because it loads so quickly that the loading spinner pops up. We could probably get rid of that, but if you're on a slower connection, it's still nice to be able to see that loading spinner that something's happening. But now you can see up here, it says first employee at company.com. Their email updated, their first and last name updated. We didn't change their type, so that's fine. We can close out of this. Here you can also see that they don't have a manager, so that's NA, so it looks good. So let's go ahead and do it for updating the personal information. Now let's go ahead and hop into the code one more time and make it so we can actually update their pay information by clicking this, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up the chapter there and continue in the next chapter. The final task that we can set up for an admin at this point is updating an employee's pay information. Once again, to this, we need to update the employee service with the reducer to make the API call to update the pay information. Let's go ahead and navigate to the employee service in here, and let's go ahead and scroll up, because the first thing we need to go ahead and do is start by setting up the property for our reducer. So let's go ahead and say submit update pay information is an arrow function that returns void and takes in a payload of pay information, an email string, and employees, which is an employee array. Let's go ahead and bring this in. We'll go ahead and import that. That looks good. And then we can go ahead and come down here. We're going to come below our submit update information. Then let's go ahead and say const submit update pay information is equal to an async arrow function. Inside of parameters, let's go ahead and pass a payload of pay information, email of type string, and employees of an employee array. Let's go and open this guy up. And in here, we're going to go ahead and set up a try block really quick. We'll also go ahead and set up a catch for E. Inside the catch, let's go ahead and say console.log E to make the compiler happy. We'll also go ahead and say set employee update error to true. Now that we have the error case figured out, let's go ahead and come up to the try. And we're going to go ahead and call set employee update to true. Then we'll go ahead and say set employee update error to false. And now that we have our state set up, we can go ahead and say const res is equal to await request.put. We want to make a put request to backticks /employee/pay $$ curly brace email. We want to include the payload. If we successfully get the response back, let's go ahead and call update employees. Inside update employees, let's go ahead and call insert updated employee. And inside here, we'll pass the employees and res.data. Now that we have all that, let's go ahead and set up the finally block. Inside the finally, regardless of if we pass or fail here, we want to go ahead and call set employee updating to false. That looks good for the logic. Let's go ahead and scroll down to our return. And now let's go ahead and just simply return that submit update pay information. And that looks like it should be good to go. Now we should be able to go ahead and create a new component to be able to update the employee and pay information, set it inside of our table, and view it and update them. So let's go ahead and get to work on that. As I mentioned in the last section, now that we have the reducer for submitting the update pay information request all set up inside our employee service, the last thing we need to do is set up the form to input and submit the data from. So let's go ahead and open up our Explorer here. Let's go ahead and make a new directory. We'll go ahead and call this update employee pay information form, then go ahead and make a new file, and this will be update employee pay information form.tsx. Make sure we spell form right. I don't want it to say from, both of those say form. Perfect. Let's close out this. This one's not going to take any CSS, so the first thing we need to go ahead and do is set up the interface for update employee pay information form props. Inside the props, we're simply just going to have an employee of type employee. Let's go ahead and import our employee here. Looks good. Let's come down below and go and say export const update employee pay information form is a react.fc equal to an arrow function. Also, I see that I have a typo here, so let's go ahead and fix that typo really quick. Now we can go and set up the props. Let's come inside the function parameters, pass an object with employee to clean this up. And let's go and open up our function here and set up our return statement. Inside the return, let's just simply go ahead and return a div, or not a div, empty fragment for the time being. And let's come up top to start doing our state and our logic here. The first thing we need to go ahead and do is gain access to the employees and employee service from our use global context. So let's go ahead and say const object with employees and employee service is equal to use global context as global context type. Let's go ahead and import our use global context as well as our global context type. Below, we want to go ahead and say const initial pay information is equal to a pay information of an empty object. Let's go ahead and import our pay information like so. Let's go ahead and open this up. Here, we'll go ahead and say ID is equal to 0. We're going to go ahead and set the pay type to employee.payinformation.payType. The pay amount is going to be employee.payamount.payamount. Let's go ahead and do it for our initial pay information state here. So let's go ahead and say const updated information and set updated information is equal to use state of type pay information, and then go ahead and set that initial pay information. Let's go ahead and import our use state here. That way it's not mad at us. Looks good. Now we need to go ahead and set up the handlers for our inputs and whatnot. So let's first go ahead and say const update pay information is equal to an arrow function. Inside, this is going to take in an event of type react.changeEvent on an HTML input element or an HTML select element. Let's go and open up our function here, and we're going to go ahead and say set updated information with an object. Inside, let's go ahead and say ... updated information. And we're going to have square brackets e.target.name : e.target.value. That looks good for updating our pay information. Let's go ahead and come down. We also need to go ahead and set up a handler for submitting it. So let's go ahead and say const handle submit update pay is equal to an arrow function. Inside our parameters, let's go ahead and take in an event of type react.mouse event on an HTML button element. And let's go ahead and open up our function. First thing we want to go ahead and do is call e.preventDefault to prevent the form from doing its default actions. Then we'll go ahead and call employee service.submit update pay information. Inside, let's go ahead and pass the updated information, the employee.email, and employees. And that should go ahead and do it for the logic for this component. Now we can come back down into our return here. We're going to go ahead and keep our fragments because we're going to be rendering a couple different things. And here we're going to go ahead and do a check to see if employee is updating again. So let's go ahead and say employee service, employee updating question mark. And then we're going to go ahead and render an empty fragment or an empty fragment. Let's go ahead and make this look a little bit prettier. So let's go ahead and just add some spacing here. So if we're loading or if we're not loading. So if we're loading, let's go ahead and render the loading component again. That looks good. And let's go and import the loading component. I don't know why it didn't work. Let's see what's going on here. I guess I double imported it. I don't know what's going on. Otherwise, let's go and import the form. Make sure this comes from our form. Open this up, and then let's go ahead and set up our props. Inside the form, the button text will be equal to update employee pay. We're going to go ahead and say error is equal to employee service.employee update error. The error message will say unable to update employee's pay. The action will be handle submit update pay, and our width will be set to 50%. Let's come inside the form, and the first thing we want to do is type in H2 that says update employee pay. Below our H2, let's go ahead and import a form select. Let's make sure it gets imported properly. Then we'll go and open this up to set up the props. The label will be pay type. The name will be pay type. The values will be an array with the string hourly and the string salary. Handle input will be update pay information. And default value will equal to updated information.payType. Let's go ahead and come below our form select and import a form input. Once again, let's make sure this gets imported properly. Looks good. And then let's go and open this up. Inside, the type will be a number. The label will be pay amount. The name will be pay amount. The placeholder will be backticks, $ curly brace, employee.payinformation.payamount. The content will be updated information.payamount. And finally, handle input will be equal to update pay information. That looks good, and that's all we need for a simple form to update the employee's pay information. The very last thing we need to do in this chapter for the add-in functionality is to add this form to the employee table, and then make sure we can successfully update the employee's pay. So let's go ahead and navigate back to the employee table and make this happen. Once again, inside the employee table, let's go and get rid of this update employee pay information empty fragment here, and let's actually go ahead and render the update employee pay information form. Let's make sure this gets imported from the proper place. And then here, let's go ahead and pass in employees equal to employee. That looks good. And finally, all we have left to do in this mammoth section of the course is to make sure add-in functionality is working at this point. So let's go ahead and hop back into the front end and make sure everything is working properly. So let's go ahead and close out of this. You can see we kind of broke some stuff here because it refreshed. We'll deal with all of that later. Let's go ahead and say admin employee at company.com and go ahead and pass in a password and log in. Cool. So the first thing we want to go ahead and try to do as an admin is to create the employee. So I guess this is a little bit scuffed. I'm not sure what happened here. We might need to look into what's going on with the form here, because this was working whenever we tested it before. Employee modal form, and let's see here. Let me do a little bit of debugging to see what happened to this. So for some reason, it thinks that we are in the error state, because if there's an error, oh wait, no, that's correct. Just kidding. It should be bigger if it's an error, so that's correct. I'm not sure why this is so, what's going on with this? I'm not sure why the CSS is broken. I guess let's update the CSS slightly. This isn't an issue with sizing here. So I guess let's go ahead and make this slightly bigger. Let's go ahead and make this 31.25 room, and then let's go ahead and bump this up to like 33, I guess. This was not an issue before, so that's curious. It's a little bit bigger, I guess. Let's go ahead and bump this to 35 room, and then maybe this to 38. Let's see what it looks like. Maybe some settings changed on my laptop or my desktop and made this the default sizing slightly different, so it made it smaller. I'm not sure. Okay, so let's go ahead and set this to 33 room, and we'll go ahead and set this to like 35.25 room. I'm wondering if default sizing got set up differently, or I tweaked something on accident, or an update went through. So you can play around with that as you see fit. It should have been 16 pixels, and that should have been plenty of space, so I'm not sure what's going on there. But again, if it seems like it's a little small for you guys, just go ahead and update that. Let's hop back in. So now, that shouldn't affect the functionality any. Let's go ahead and make a employee, and we'll go ahead and call this 2. We'll go ahead and say the contact is 444. 444 and then 1234. You guys can put whatever phone number you want. Obviously, here it's going to be manager employee at company.com, and then they'll be paid hourly. And let's say they get paid $30 an hour. Now we can go ahead and try to create that employee. Now let's go ahead and copy down their email. So let me go ahead and paste this somewhere. And let's also go ahead and copy down their temporary password. Looks good. Now we can go ahead and close out of that. So it looks all good and dandy. Now we can go ahead and, for example, open up one of these to view their information. So that looks good. So now we can go ahead and actually click this. And now let's say we want to go ahead and update this person to actually be second employee. So we can go ahead and say second and employee, like so, and go ahead and update them. And now we just screwed up their email address. That's completely fine. We can also go ahead and close out this. We can go ahead and open up this guy, and let's say he's been working here and he deserves a raise. So we can say like he gets 720.50 now. We can go and update that pay information and close out this and reopen it, and that pay information has stuck. So that's looking good. And then we can go ahead and close out of everything and log out, quote unquote, by doing this. And then let's go ahead and pass in, I think we end up calling them second employee. Let's go ahead and say second employee at company, maybe.com. And then we need to go ahead and paste in their temporary password. So let's go ahead and copy the temporary password. Hopefully I didn't scuff everything, and log in. Looks good. Now we are in our second employee page, and that is all looking good. So that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for this section. Next section, we'll go ahead and work on the employee stuff, but I'll see you guys in the outro and see you in the next section.
That was a long one, but that's going to go ahead and do it for the third chapter of our Spring Security Employee Management System course. In this chapter, we successfully brought in the Spring Data JPA and H2 dependencies and set up our database schemas/entities to authenticate the employees from the database. We also enabled the application to authorize requests based on the employee's role. The first role that we focused on was the admin's logic and abilities by setting up the ability to view and create new employees, along with updating information such as their personal information and pay information. Finally, we explained the React application to use these new endpoints and allow the admin employees to more easily do their jobs on the web interface. As mentioned earlier in the video, if you would like access to the entire course up front, including all of the code and materials which comes along with it, we have two ways to achieve this. You can either purchase the course over at Udemy. I will have the link in the description below. Udemy will be setting the price as they see fit for the content, but I will also go ahead and attempt to run as many promotions/coupons on the course as I can. The second option is to subscribe to the course level membership of my channel, and this will grant you access to the entire course, plus access to the private GitHub repository with the code. This is going to be a flat $15, and you will only need to be a member for a single month while this course is out to gain access, and then you can go ahead and decline to renew anytime you see fit. Of course, if neither of these options work for you, I will be incrementally uploading each chapter to YouTube, and you can go ahead and follow along completely for free. The only thing that I do ask is if you are following along for free is that you like and comment on the video. It'll really help out with the reach of the course, and if you do want to see more programming content similar to this, I would highly recommend subscribing. With that being said, I hope you join me in the next chapter when we'll be expanding our application to allow for employee type employees to fill out and submit their timesheets, along with updating the personal and contact information. With that being said, y'all, this has been Ethan or Uncoder. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you all in the next video.